Hello and welcome to this 15-hour edition of the Practical Ethical Hacking course. My name is Heath Adams and I'm going to be your instructor for the entirety of this course. Okay, quick edit. So you might be looking at the YouTube video and seeing that it's only 7+ hours. That is because YouTube recently implemented a rule that we can no longer have videos over 12 hours. So I had to split this into two parts. I had to add this edit in and go back and re-render everything. So this is officially part 1. And we'll go through part 1, and then I'll have a link in the description below for part 2. So without further ado, let's jump right in. A really quick who am I? Again, my name is Heath Adams, and I am the CEO of TCM Security. We are a cybersecurity consulting firm and an educational institution. On a day-to-day basis, we primarily focus on what's called ethical hacking. That is where companies hire us to try to hack into them, to find vulnerabilities and let them know of any security issues they may have before the bad people find those on their own. That could be breaking into a network, a web application, wireless network, mobile applications, thick client applications, etc. It can even be breaking into a building, which is called physical pen testing. There's a lot of different types of hacking out there, and we're going to cover quite a bit of that in this course. Now, hacking is such an interesting field because you don't have to necessarily come from an IT background. I'm actually a former accountant and I just fell in love with hacking. And I know people from all different walks of life. We have somebody that works for us that used to be a mayor. I've seen doctors, I've seen pharmacists, I've seen all different kinds of weird backgrounds come into ethical hacking. So if you're watching this and you really don't have an IT background, a formal one, that's okay. As long as you have some basic computer knowledge, some basic networking knowledge, that's all you really need to succeed in this course. We're going to hold your hand the entire way through and make sure that you get and understand everything that's presented in front of you. In terms of the qualifications, I've listed my hacker certifications. That's not all the certifications, but those are the ones that are relevant, maybe make me an expert, whatever. I've also listed my social media. If you want to follow me on LinkedIn or follow the company on Twitter, follow me on YouTube. I would love if you just hit subscribe right now before we even get started, or you want to wait till the end. That's perfectly fine as well. We're making our way to 1 million subscribers and you could be a part of that. And I would absolutely love it if you did. We also have some sites. We have our consulting site, which is just tcm-tech.com. We've got the Academy, which I'll show you here in a second. We also have certifications site. Now, before we dive into things, you might say to yourself, this course seems familiar. And that's because it might be. Last year, we released a ethical hacking course in 12 hours. This year, it's up to 15 hours. Last year, that total of views got 3 million views in 11 months, which is great. It hasn't even been a full year yet. And we taught quite a bit of lessons in here. You can see all the different lessons we taught in here. So you might say, hey, what's the difference between this 12-hour course and the 15-hour course? Well, there's quite a few differences, 3 hours to be exact, but even with the 3 hours of time difference, we went through a lot of this. And for example, in the Kali Linux section, that's been completely redone. The Python section's been completely redone. So a lot of these videos and tools and ideas have been brought into 2023 methodologies. So not only are there 3 hours more, but a lot of the videos and content have been recreated for 2023 specifically to make sure that this is up to date and fresh. So you're getting a brand new course. This is the latest and greatest. Now, this course is actually an extension of a 25-hour, it's pretty close to 27 hours now of materials that is on our TCM Security Academy website. And this is the only time I'm going to try to sell you on anything throughout the entirety of this 15 hours. So I just ask for 1 minute of your time. This course takes the first half. The 15 hours takes the first half of what's in here. If we scroll down to the curriculum, we actually have all the first half here. You'll see this. If you actually came to the website, it's the exact same thing you're getting in this course. This goes all the way through the capstone and the buffer overflows here. And that is a great stopping point. We'll go to the capstone, we'll go through it. It's a great midway point to test your skills. If you get through the midway point and you say, hey, I really like this, I want to get the rest of the course, we have even more stuff in here. We have Active Directory, which is one of my favorite things to pen test against. And I would say it's the best part of the entire course. We teach that. We cover quite a bit of this. All this is on Active Directory right here. We cover more post exploitation. We cover web app pen testing and application pen testing. We get into a little bit of wireless testing and legal documents and all that fun stuff. So the 15 hours that's here, it's a great resource. It gets you started. If you love it, you love our instruction, you want more, this course is $29.99. All of our courses, in fact, on the Academy, if we go over here, they're all $29.99. So if you're interested, we have an all access pass that gets you access to everything. We've got courses on Linux, Python. We've got courses on privilege escalation, OSINT, external pen testing, all different kinds of stuff in here. If you're interested in that, I just encourage you to check out the website. You don't have to buy anything. This is completely 100% free if you just want to stick with the 15 hours. Last but not least, this course does lead to what is a certification. We have a certification called the PNPT. It's the Practical Network Penetration Testing certification. I'll link it down in the description below. It's a one-of-a-kind certification. You go through, you try to hack an organization, you write a report, you present a debrief. And the good thing about this is it gets you job ready for the field. So if you can get through this certification, you actually go look for the PNPT on LinkedIn or Indeed, you're going to find this on job postings. So this course, 15 hours of this is part of a 50-hour curriculum that we have. And so if you feel that, hey, I really am interested in this field and maybe I want a certification, consider looking at the PNPT as well. And that's really it. We're going to end here. Salesmanship's over. Please enjoy this 15 hours. If you do, please like, comment, subscribe, all that fun YouTube stuff. Let's go ahead and jump right into this course. I'm so excited to teach you in this 2023 edition. All right, I hate PowerPoints, but I love this template. I don't know what's so cool about it. It's all the colors, I think. So welcome to A Day in the Life of an Ethical Hacker 2022 edition. Let's talk about a pen tester's day-to-day, and I'm going to highlight this at a very high level. So what we do is we roll out of bed, hopefully we wake up in the morning, and we kick off our day. Now our day can be performing an assessment, and we're going to talk about the different assessment types that are out there. It could be writing a report, it could be giving a debrief, or a collection of the three. When we perform an assessment, we're talking about different types of pen testing or ethical hacking, and we're going to cover the most common types. We'll talk about some other types as well. Once we perform our assessment, we need to write a report. We deliver a report to our client. That report then gets digested, and eventually we give them a debrief if they want one, and we talk about our findings. And so we'll cover this whole process from start to finish. So let's talk about the different types of assessments that we could perform as an ethical hacker. Now, the first type of assessment I want to talk about is what is called an external network pen test. And one of the questions that we ask people when we're doing phone screens and baselines on interviews is we say, hey, can you tell me what an external pen test is versus an internal pen test? And honestly, I would say at least half of the people get the answer wrong. So make sure you're paying attention and you take notes because this may come up on an interview. Now, an external pen test is probably the most common type of pen test that we perform. If you just got hired as a penetration tester and you're brand new to the industry, it's likely they're going to start you out doing external network pen tests. These pen tests are the most straightforward and something that a junior could take on and work through and build up some experience and or confidence as they go through their process. So an external pen test is looking at an organization's security from the outside. This could be us trying to hack in from our mom's basement or from another country or whatever it might be. Whatever scenario plays out in your head, that's what it could be. You're trying to hack in from the outside. The methodology for external pen tests focuses heavily on what's called open source intelligence gathering, or OSINT. We're trying to gather as much intel and data about an organization. Who are their employees? What is their email format? Have they ever been involved in a breach? Can we find out what passwords were in those breaches? Can we collect data and then use it against that organization to breach a login panel or breach the VPN or get into an area where we otherwise would not be allowed into? Now, why do we focus so much on open source intelligence? Well, because this is an external assessment, you have to think about the internet as a whole. There are bots scanning the internet 24/7. If you don't believe me, try putting up an SSH server or something similar and leave it up for 24 hours and see how many login attempts you get on that server. It's a lot. Bots are scanning all the time. So what does that mean for us? Well, that means that if we do vulnerability scanning and we find something that is incredibly dangerous, well, somebody's probably already found that as well. So the chances of us finding something like remote code execution where we can land on a machine externally without doing a lot of work, it's pretty low. Usually organizations have their external networks buttoned up from a patching perspective. So what we're really looking at is the intel that we can gather. Where are the login panels? Who are the users? And how can we use that against the organization? Now, this is the most common type of pen test that organizations do, in my opinion, for two reasons. The main reason is that a lot of compliance organizations dictate that an external network pen test must be performed annually. That is not true for the rest of the pen tests, though some compliance organizations might dictate other pen tests. The external is by far the most common. The other side of this is external pen tests tend to be a little bit cheaper than the rest of the assessments depending on the size and scope of the engagement. And a lot of organizations like to dip their toes in the water before going and doing more assessments with a security firm. So they might test you out and say, hey, let's do an external pen test. We'll see how it goes. If we like you, we'll hire you for more stuff. So between those two reasons, we see a lot of external network pen tests, more so than anything else in my opinion. Now, these pen tests tend to last around 32 to 40 hours on average, though if you have a very large engagement, that can go a lot longer, or if you have a very small company and you're looking at one IP address or 5 IP addresses and 10 employees, it's probably not going to take you 32 hours to do that pen test, maybe somewhere in the 8 to 16 hour range. We then tend to add another 8 to 16 hours for report writing, and we'll touch base on report writing towards the end of this video. So moving on is what is called an internal network pen test. This is assessing an organization's security from the inside of the network. This means that we somehow breached the perimeter. Perhaps we sent a phishing email and somebody opened our email, clicked on our link, and now we're inside the network. Or maybe we broke into the building and left a Dropbox behind. Whatever scenario in your head you want to play as well, you can do that. What we do on our end is we typically send a laptop out to the client. The client plugs that laptop in, and we are able to remote into that laptop and perform a network assessment as if we were sitting inside the office. This is why a lot of work nowadays is remote, because we don't have to be on site anymore to do internal pen tests. Now, the methodology for an internal penetration test focuses heavily on Active Directory. Now, if you don't know what Active Directory attacks are, you absolutely need to learn those in order to be a successful internal penetration tester. And it's one of those things that a majority of the organizations that are out there use. So I believe the statement that I read once was 95% or 99%, don't quote me on this by the way, of the Fortune 500 companies use Active Directory in their environments. And I honestly think that this number is way closer to 99% than anything else. Every single internal pen test I've ever done, with the exception of one client, one very small client, has always been on Active Directory. So you need to understand Active Directory methodology in order to perform an internal network pen test. These typically last 32 to 40 hours, though they can run a lot longer, again, depending on the size and the scope. They don't typically run shorter, though I have seen them run 16 to 24 hours if the network is very small, but there is a checklist that we have to run through that is usually in the 32 to 40 hour range. And just like external pen tests, we tack on another 8 to 16 hours for report writing. Now, the third type of assessment I wanted to talk about is a web application pen test. This is probably the second most common. I wanted to group the external and the internal pen test together. But you have to think about networks nowadays versus web applications. There are websites everywhere. There are more websites than there are networks. If we're just counting websites to business networks, there probably are more websites to home networks as well, though I'm not entirely sure of that. I would argue that the answer is probably way more websites than home networks. So with that, there's a lot of attack surface that's out there. So organizations will come to us and they'll say, hey, we need a web application pen test. This can be dictated, again, by compliance. Perhaps stakeholders want to see this, or maybe the client is very interested in the security of the application and wants to make sure that it is very secure before they launch their application. Now, the methodology focuses heavily on web-based attacks, obviously, and the OWASP testing guidelines. So OWASP stands for the Open Web Application Security Project. If you've never heard of it, Google it. It's a great resource. They have testing guidelines for not just web application, but mobile as well. They have how to test, how to defend, how to prevent, all kinds of great things. and we follow their testing guidelines pretty exclusively. If you're ever going to be a pen tester and you want to pen test against web apps, you for sure need to know what the OWASP top 10 attacks are, because you will be asked those in an interview. Now, these engagements last typically 32 to 40 hours, and that is pretty much the minimum. We have a very thorough checklist that we have to go through when we're doing a web app pen test, and I would say it pushes closer to 40 hours than anything else. Unless it were a very, very small and specific web application, they're almost always in the 32 to 40 hour range, with another 8 to 16 hours for report writing. Another common assessment that we are asked to perform as pen testers is what's known as a wireless pen test or a wireless network pen test. And we're assessing an organization's wireless network security. So the methodology will vary depending on what type of wireless network is being used. For example, if they're using a guest network, we might log on to the guest network and test segmentation. Can a guest access internal resources, or is the network properly segmented? If they're using a pre-share key, which is what's common in most households, then we might test that pre-share key for password strength and see how strong the pre-share key is and how strong the password is. If they're using enterprise-based network, then we open ourselves up to a variety of new attacks as well. So our methodology really changes depending on what is being used. Now, wireless pen testing is fairly straightforward. You can look up the methodology online, find blog posts about it. You just need a wireless network adapter that you can honestly pick up for $30 to $50 at most. And I'll leave a link in the description below to my favorite wireless network adapter, but you can just pick one that is compatible with your machine, and that will work and do packet injection. It's honestly where a lot of hackers start. This is where I got my start before I ever learned about real pen testing or anything. I went and bought a cheap wireless adapter, and I started just hacking my own network and some devices that I had laying around at the house, and I learned how to hack wireless pretty quick. So it's one of those things that kind of gets you excited and gets you into the hacking mindset and kind of teaches you some of the wireless assessments that are out there, and I think it's pretty fun as well. Now, these typically last about 4 to 8 hours per SSID. So if we're testing 2 SSIDs, we're probably looking in the 8 to 16 hour range, and then typically another 2 to 4 hours for report writing. All right, the last thing I want to touch on in terms of assessments that we do quite a bit are physical pen tests and social engineering assessments. So when we're doing a physical pen test, we're assessing an organization's physical security. And our methodology is going to depend on the tasks and goals that are at hand that are given to us by the client. So if we're doing a physical pen test, we are going on site and we're trying to break into the building. That can be through cloning badges, that can be through social engineering, that can be through picking locks. There's a lot of different scenarios that are at hand there. Now, that methodology again depends on what we're up against, and it also depends on the client's goal. The client might say, hey, we want to see if you can just even get in the building. Or they might say, hey, I want you to get in the building and find our server closet and take a picture of yourself in our server closet. We want to see if you can make it there. So there's typically some goal behind why you're breaking into a building, but it is legal breaking and entering, and it's pretty fun and pretty exciting if that's your jam. And there's a lot of social engineering involved in that. So it's very, very fun engagement to do. The other side of this is pure social engineering. And what I mean by that is doing something like a phishing campaign against an organization. And we might actually do a phishing campaign in combination with an external pen test. So we might combine those together, though often they're left apart. We might do something like a phishing campaign where we call people and we say, hey, I'm from IT. Can you give me your password? Or I just sent you a code to your account. Can you give me the code that I just sent you? We might do a smishing campaign where we send text messages and see if anybody responds back to us. There's a lot of different social engineering that's out there, and we have different campaigns that we can run in different engagements depending again on the client's need. Now, the great thing about this is social engineering and physical pen testing offer a lot of learning opportunities and training opportunities. For example, when we do physical pen tests, we wear cameras on our hip and we record everything that we do, not just for our liability, but also for teaching end users at the end of the day. We'll cut that video, have a lessons learned, here's the good things they did, here's the bad things they did, and they can walk away with a way to improve moving forward. The weakest element of any organization is going to be the human. You can have a great environment, great policy, security, everything set up, and all it takes is one really nice person to hold the door open for you, and that can lead to catastrophic events. So Social engineering, again, is a very important part of security, and it's one of my favorite things to assess when I'm doing this type of work. Now, again, these can last anywhere from 16 to 40 hours, maybe even more, depending on the engagement that you're on, plus another 4 to 8 hours for report writing, again, maybe more, depending on the scope of the engagement that you're working. Now, these aren't the only assessments. There are other assessments that we might perform as a pen tester. These tend to get a little bit more specialized, and you might have to take additional training in order to learn this type of stuff. But these are things that we perform at work, and you may end up performing as well. So we have mobile penetration testing. It's a lot like web application penetration testing in the sense that you're testing against an application, except it's on a mobile device, so iOS or Android, and then there's specific methodology and techniques related to those operating systems. You may have IoT or Internet of Things penetration testing. Somebody might send you something. Like one time we got sent over a pressure cooker that was a wireless pressure cooker, and they wanted it pen tested. So we had a lot of fun doing that. There's red team engagements, which are kind of sort of like pen testing, but not really. When I say pen testing, I think of banging at the front door, where red teaming is trying to sneak in whatever creative way you can. So a red team engagement might say, hey, we want you to hack our company. You've got a month or 6 months or a year. And we don't want to hear you, we don't want to see you, we don't want to know about it, just let us know if you can hack into us. In these types of engagements, the methodology can be anything depending on what is allowed in scope. Usually it's pretty open in the scope. I've heard of red teams sending people to the client location, and they might even live there for a little bit. They might befriend some of the employees, try to become buddy-buddy, learn some internal secrets, maybe get a password, slip them a thumb drive. They might do all kinds of social engineering engagements. It's very, very custom and unique to the client and depends, again, on the scope, which is usually pretty wide, and what they can and can't do. So red team engagements are pretty awesome, but they're also incredibly stealthy, where pen testing is very time limited in the sense that we might only have a week engagement. We're going to know the IP addresses, we're going to know our scope, and we're going to have a set defined limitation in front of us, where red team doesn't have that as much. Now, a purple team engagement is something that you might do, tabletop exercises and things like that, where you as a red teamer or being offensive and working with a blue team or defensive, you work together and that makes purple. And in that sense, you might tabletop and say, hey, I just ran this attack. Do you see me in your network? I just ran this other attack. Do you see me? And you try to establish a baseline, and you can see, hey, where's the detection at? Where is the detection weak? And how can we improve detection mechanisms within the network? It's usually a bit of a more mature process. An organization that's never gone through a pen test before likely isn't just going to jump right into a purple team engagement, but it is something that more mature organizations do in order to improve their baselines and improve their detection mechanisms internally. Now, I've covered just a handful of the different types of pen testing engagements that you can work on. There's car hacking, there's airplane hacking, there's SCADA hacking. There's all kinds of really cool stuff out there that you can do. I just covered the most common items, but you can absolutely specialize if that's something that you're interested in. Now, with all the fun of getting to do assessment work, there comes the downside of report writing and debriefing. I actually enjoy doing both, and in order to be a successful consultant, you really need to be a three-headed person in a sense. You have to be really good at technical abilities. You have to be really good at report writing and communicating effectively, not just to a technical audience, but to a non-technical audience. And you also have to be good with presentation skills in the sense that you need to present your findings to a technical and non-technical audience. So with report writing, we typically deliver a report within a week after the engagement. Now, that report should be high level and technical. So we have what's called an executive summary for non-technical people. Think about a CEO who might not be a technical person. If they're going to read the report, it should still be crystal clear what the issues were and how they should be fixed. And that's what the executive summary is. Now, we have a technical findings section, and that's for the people doing the work. Maybe the security engineer, the network engineer, or the web app developer, depending on who you're working with. They can digest the findings. They can say, hey, here's what they found. Here's what tools they used. Here's how they were able to do it. And here are the recommendations for remediation. Now, recommendations should be incredibly clear. You should have high-level recommendations like, hey, patch this. And you should have technical recommendations as well that says, hey, go to this website, here's how you would install this patch, etc., etc. So depending on your audience, you want to make sure that you're communicating effectively to both of them. And for a lot of new pen testers, this can be an incredible struggle. It's one of those things that you write a report, you get beat up on it in the QA process, and you just get better over time. And it's just something that is kind of passed down and you learn as you go. So don't be worried if you're not great at report writing. Just make sure that you understand that if you're going to do this job, you will have to write reports and you will have to get better at it as you go. Last but not least is the debrief process. Now, a debrief walks your clients through your report findings. And again, this should be non-technical and technical as well. You may be sitting in a room with a CEO and a network engineer. You might be sitting in front of all technical people. You might be sitting in front of all C-level non-technical people. So you need to make sure that when you are presenting your findings that you can explain it at a high level and a technical level as well. I've seen many people struggle with this. All right, I've been in one situation. I remember that I was in a debrief with a coworker of mine. This was years ago, and he was very much struggling to communicate. He was giving very technical, in-depth details about what he was finding, and the CEO kept stopping him and saying, "I don't understand what you're saying." So we had to do a little bit of translation because he really wasn't great at the debrief process yet. He was still fairly new. And it's one of those things that if you're going to be an effective consultant, you need to be able to do both. Now, the debrief is important because it also gives the opportunity for your client to ask any questions about the findings that you have and address any concerns as well. So maybe there's a finding that they want to challenge or they want more information on. It gives them the opportunity to do that. Because when we give them the initial report, the report is a draft. After the debrief, or if they choose to not have a debrief, we finalize that report. So the debrief is the last opportunity the client has to understand what you're presenting to them and to ask any questions or address any concerns. So it's a very, very important process. All right, hopefully that was informative for you. If you're looking to become a pen tester, you should know at a high level what these different types of assessments are. And you should know what you're getting yourself into, because a lot of people think, oh, it's fun and games. I just get to go hack things. And yes, that's a lot of the job, but a lot of the job is also doing report writing and doing debriefs in front of clients. So if you're not strong with report writing, or if you're not strong with your presentation skills, you may have some time on the struggle bus before you get decent at it. All right, so make sure that you know coming into that those are things that you're going to have to be doing and that you're comfortable doing those things as well. So before we begin in this course and we really start to dive in, it's important to cover one of the topics that I'm going to harp on the most, which is effective note-keeping. If you're going to be successful in your career and you're going to be successful in this course, you really need to take good notes. Now, in this first video, I'm going to show you what my notebook kind of looks like, not only for my personal notebook, but as a notebook for an assessment and how I might take notes for an assessment. And then I'll also show you some note-keeping applications that I prefer or I've heard students prefer. In the second video, we're going to cover how to install one of the applications and another cool application used for taking screenshots. So let's take a look at my notebook first. So here is my notebook, and actually let's click over here. So this is my notebook, and you can see it's really long. It's got all kinds of stuff in here, and it's just something that I build upon. This one in particular is actually only geared towards Active Directory. So I have a few different notebooks. This one is Active Directory, and it's actually a few different courses that I've taken in the past that I've kind of put together. And then just for assessment work, etc., I just kind of have a little cheat sheet here. So I wanted to show you this one in particular because these were built off of courses, and you're going to be working through a course, so kind of just get an idea of how maybe to structure it. So here you can see I structured it, and I've got different modules here where, okay, module 1 might have had this email macro fundamentals. Module 2 here has all these different components to them, right? And we have our notes, then we have child notes, and even sub-children to those child notes. And I'll show you how to create that here in a second. But let's say, for example, enumeration, which is one of the most important things that you're going to cover in hacking. And we take a look at enumeration. You don't have to understand what any of this means here, but you could see if I want to look at a domain and I want to get the current domain that I'm on, here's the command I run. And here is a picture of what it looks like, and here's what comes back when you run that command. That's great. That's what I want to see. And I have a whole list of commands for all of these in here, right? So if I'm confused on a assessment and I want to go and find a command that I'm not sure of, I can go to my little cheat sheet here. Now, again, this is really long, so you have to create your notes the way it really helps you. For a course, I think it's good to write it all out step by step like this, and then go back and make a cheat sheet. I don't need these pictures anymore. I've been doing this for a while. So maybe I just say, hey, get current domain is get net domain. And then I say, hey, okay, get object of another domain. Here's an example of it. I don't need the pictures because it makes it really long. But as an example, and over time, you learn with the pictures as well. At least I do. So let's build from that. Here is an example of an actual assessment that I did for a client. And you can see how I did this. Now, I did an external, internal, and web application assessment for this client, and these were the findings. Now, I'm only going to show you what is masked or obfuscated already or doesn't reveal client information, but as you can see here, one example is on the internal, they had something called SMB signing disabled. You don't need to worry about it, but here in my picture, I've got a nice picture. The picture has highlighted, it says, hey, message signing disabled, that signifies SMB signings disabled. And it has the IP address. So we identified the machine and we give proof of concept that this SMB signing is disabled here. Another example, MS17010. These are both internal exploits that you're going to encounter in this course. Here's one. I checked this machine. It says, hey, this target's not patched. Now this is one I didn't exploit, but it shows that it's actually vulnerable to this attack. So these are a couple screenshots that I'll put. Now, your notes could be different than mine. How I organize is I take a screenshot, I put it in here, and then I make sure that I have at least the IP address and the screenshot for reference because I'll remember it. But if you need to go in here and take detailed notes, that's absolutely fine as well. You always want good notes for your assessments because you never know if a client's going to come back in 6 months or even a year and say, hey, what was that one thing that you did here? And if you go back to your notes, you say, oh, I did this. And some people get down really into the weeds. They have dates, times, everything for step-by-step what they do on an assessment. And that's completely up to you and how well you take your notes. This is kind of how I lay it out. And then you see the green check marks next to it. I add those green check marks when I'm doing my report. So as I'm building my report out and I cover something in the report, I'll just go ahead and right click and I'll change the note icon to a check mark, meaning that I've written that part of the report for that finding. And we just kind of go through over time. So with that being said, I do want to show you some decent applications. The one that I'm using here and that you see is called KeepNote. Now I run on Windows as a base. So keepnote.org, that's how you get KeepNote. It is for Linux, it is for Mac OS X, but this is totally a preference thing. Me, I prefer it. I've been using it for a long time. Some people don't like it, okay? So I'm gonna offer some alternatives as well. Cherry Tree comes built into Kali Linux, as you're going to see here in just a little bit. Worth looking at, worth trying, seeing if you like it. OneNote's another example if you use Microsoft. And if you're a Mac user, a lot of students have told me that Joplin is really good. Now, I've never used this, but I keep hearing great things about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all of these into the course resources, and you'll be able to look at them, download them, decide on your own. Now, you're not limited to these 4 note-keeping applications by any means. Feel free to use whatever you like to take notes. If you want pen and paper, that's great as well. And so just make sure that you're taking good notes. And we're gonna harp on this throughout the entire course over and over and over again. So make sure you're taking good notes. So from here, what we're gonna do is we're going to install KeepNote in the next video, and we're gonna install an awesome tool called GreenShot. And I'm gonna show you what GreenShot does and why it's so cool, and I cannot live on any assessment without it. So let's catch you over in the next video when we work on installing those tools. All right, so in that example in the last video, we talked about using KeepNote. So if you go to Google and you type in KeepNote, all you gotta do is come here, and KeepNote works on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS X. So great tool. The only issue with this tool is it has not been updated in a long time. Some people find issue with that. if you're one of those people, I'm actually not, you can use other tools. OneNote is an option. Cherry Tree is also an option. You can also find other options out there for you. If you have a favorite note-taking tool already, that's absolutely fine as well. Just make sure to take good notes, especially during this course, and make the most of it. Learn all the things that you can and incorporate that. So I will show you quickly how to install Keep Note here. And another thing to note too is while we do this is Cherry Tree is available on Kali Linux. We're going to install Kali Linux here very soon. So once we install Kali Linux and we get into the introductory Linux and we explore it, I'll show you a little bit more of Cherry Tree and what that looks like. And we'll talk pros and cons of Cherry Tree when we get there. So here we go. If you are on Windows, you can follow along, or you download your appropriate one here, depending if you're on Linux or if you need Mac as well. So I'm going to go ahead and install the exe, and I'm just going to actually run this. We're just going to say yes, and I'm going to say next, next, install. And that's it. I mean, it's that quick. And then we just launch Keep Note, and here you go. We've got Keep Note. So the other tool, the really cool tool that I love, this one is called Greenshot. Now this is a screenshot capturing tool. So let's go to downloads here on Greenshot. If you are running on something other than Windows, or Windows or Mac, so basically Linux, you're going to need a different tool. The recommended tool that I've heard out there is called FlameShot, F-L-A-M-E. Though I have no experience with it, I've heard it is identical to Greenshot. So here I'm going to download the latest stable. I'm going to select run. Yes. Okay. Accept the agreement. Give away our firstborn. Next, next, next. Place it however you want. I'm just going to next through everything. And I'm going to start Greenshot with Windows Start. That is my preference. I love this tool again. So it's finished. All right. Let's take a look at it. So it should be running. Let's start Greenshot now. Okay, now you see it running down here on the bottom. Okay, let's go. Let's open up a web page. Let's say we want to take a screenshot of something. Now you just hit your print screen button, and this nice cursor gets brought up here. And let's say we want to just take this downloads part right here. We're just going to capture this. And now we have choices. We can just save the image that we just grabbed. Or my favorite is that we can actually just open in an image editor, right? So let's open this in their image editor. Look at this. Okay, so here's the picture we just grabbed, right? On top of this, really great tools. Let me show you two that I use always. So I come into effects, I put a border on it. Let's say that you have like a Kali Linux, and Kali Linux, if you've never used it, has a black terminal. It's really nasty. So let's imagine here that it's black. It's nasty when it comes to reporting. So let's imagine that we're in this situation and we're writing a report and we've got this black background similar to this. Well, you can see what I just did. I just inverted it. And I do this for all of my reports. I invert the Kali background. So that way it's white. And that way it looks nice on a report. And when we get into the reporting, you'll kind of see what that looks like. But I like a nice clean background. It saves on ink as well if they were to print it. And it's just nice and neat when you give it to a client. So I always invert my images if I need to. You've got the black border here. Another thing is, let's say you want to point something out. You saw in my Keep Note notebook that I had a highlight. You can just click that button up here and just highlight something, like right here. Great. Another tool that's in here is this obfuscate. So let's say that there's like a password or something really sensitive in here that you don't want the client to see, or you don't want to reveal on a final report. You can do that, and then you can just like up the pixel size on this and make it really blurry, you know? So it's a really, really great tool. And then when you're done, you can copy it to your clipboard. You can save the file. I just usually like copy this, and if I want to go paste it, like, you know, make a new notebook or whatever, I'll just paste it in my Keep Note and just kind of go from there. So again, fantastic tool, awesome to use. If I had two recommendations for your note keeping, it's Keep Note and Greenshot. If I had to make one recommendation out of the two, it's absolutely Greenshot. You can be flexible on your note keeping tool. So again, hopefully this helps you. Again, please do take good notes through this course. You're going to find yourself wanting to know, hey, what was that command I ran again? And because we're going to go through so much stuff by the time this is all said and done that you're going to want to remember it. So please take good notes. So from here, let's go ahead and move on into our networking refresher, and we'll catch you in the next video. Hello everyone and welcome to this section on networking. So this section is titled Networking Refresher, meaning that some of you might have a networking background. And if you're looking at this list that's on the screen and you go down the list and you say, yep, I know all those, you can feel free to skip this section. If you've taken some of these in the past and you just might want a little bit of a refresher on them, then this section is for you. We're going to cover these topics not totally in depth, but we're going to use it as a way to brush up. And then we'll hit on networking again when we get into introductory Linux. So if you are unfamiliar with things like TCP, UDP, and the three-way handshake, or if your subnetting's a little shaky or you don't know what the OSI model is, chances are you should probably stick around and just click through this series, watch it, and build that foundation. Remember, we talked about one of the core foundations of pen testing being a strong networking background. This is a good way to build it up, remember what you might have forgotten, and go from there. So let's go ahead and just jump right into the first video, which is going to be IP addresses. What's up, everybody? So I'm going to preface this video really quick with that it is raining pretty hard here. So if the soothing sounds of the rain put you to sleep during this video and you can hear it, I'm very, very sorry, but the show must go on. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be talking about IP addresses. Now, if you've ever used a computer before and you're anywhat familiar with IT, you probably know what an IP address is. But I want to take this a little bit deeper in theory on why we use IP addresses, what types of IP addresses are out there, and talk more about protocols and how IP addresses are actually designed and made up. So I'm here in a Kali terminal, and I'm just going to type in a simple command, and that command is ifconfig. Now, if you've used Linux before, this might be familiar to you. If you used Windows, it's similar to ipconfig. All I'm trying to do is bring up my IP address. So what we can see here is that we have an IP address, which is our inet. This is my IP address here. I also have another IP address, this inet6. This is what's called an IPv6 address. So we've got this inet, which is considered an IPv4, and this inet6, which is considered an IPv6. Now you can notice right away that there's two different types of notations for these. This inet here is in a decimal notation, and the IPv6 is in a hexadecimal notation. We'll get to the importance of that in just a second. So when it comes to IP addresses, this looks probably pretty familiar to us. This is an IP address. This is how we communicate. We communicate over layer 3. And you're going to hear me talking about layers repeatedly throughout the course, or at least throughout this part of the course, so that we can get familiar with how we're actually doing this. So I want you to be familiar with troubleshooting these layers, and these layers all refer to something called the OSI model. So when we talk about layers, we think about the OSI model, and I'll introduce the OSI model here in a few videos, and it should all click once I introduce the OSI model. So if I brought in the OSI model up front, it might be boring, might not make sense. So I'm going to introduce the OSI model near the end, and you're going to say, hey, yeah, that all makes sense. So what we've got here is we've got this IPv4 address, and this is the most commonly used format that we use today, right? We use IPv4 for mostly everything. And again, this is in that decimal notation. So when we see this decimal notation, it's just realistically a bunch of ones and zeros that are put together so that we have this human readable format. Realistically, all we're seeing here with 192, this first section here, this first octet, is actually just a bunch of ones and zeros. It's 8 bits. So we've got a range of 8 ones and zeros here. We've got another 8 here, and 8 here. So when it's all said and done, this inet, or this IPv4, is made up of 32 bits, 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8 here, and which equals 4 bytes. So another way to think about that is to think about it as, say, something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, period. Okay, that is one section there. So we've got 8 ones that can make up this, and then we'd have another 8, etc. I'm not going to beat a dead horse here. But I do want to give you guys another example. So if we go into our applications and we go to a text editor really quick, So the way this looks is something like this. We start with a number like 128. I'm going to try to space this out as best as possible. And all I like to do is think of 128 as my base, and this will make a lot more sense when we get into subnetting. So please, if you're confused by this, don't worry. This is all theory right now. When we get into subnetting and we get hands-on, it'll make a lot more sense, I promise you. So let's say we have ones and zeros here. If we have a 1 for each of these sections, and I'm going to space this out again as best as possible, it's not pretty. But if we have a 1 for all of these, this equals 255. Why does this equal 255? Well, you take this, and all these numbers add up. 1 plus 2 plus 4 plus 8, all this adds up to 255. So let's say if we didn't have all the ones and zeros, we had just some ones enabled, like these last 3 here. Okay, well, this would equal 7, because we have 4 plus 2 plus 1 equals 7. So our first number, or whatever number this applied to in the octet, would be 7. So if we had 7.7.7.7, it would just be this numbers repeating over and over. These numbers repeating over and over, right? So be 0.0000111 dot 0.0000111, and so forth. So this is kind of what it looks like behind the scenes, because again, a computer is just ones and zeros. We're all binary. So what we're going to do is we're going to close this out. We're going to talk a little bit of other theory when it comes to this, and why INET or IPv6 and why IPv4. So let's close this and let's talk about IPv4. So I'm going to bring up a calculator. And with IPv4, we have these 32 bits. So what we can do is we could take 2 to the 32nd power, and this is the possible amount of IP addresses that we could have. So we have somewhere in the 4 billion range of IP addresses. Well, spoiler alert, we don't have only 4 billion people on Earth, right? We're up to 7 something billion at this point, and all these IP address spaces are gone. So IPv4 has been around since 1981. Nobody thought we were ever going to use all these addresses. Computers weren't really a thing. Who knew that we were going to want all these addresses? And, you know, these companies started buying them up, and they started buying them up in large chunks. And then they sold those to ISPs, and then ISPs sell those to you. And so these IP addresses have been gone for a very, very long time. And chances are when you have an IP address and you get this IPv4, you're only going to get one. If you're a corporation, you might buy it more. But we've run out of IP address space. There's just not enough to go around. So the theory is, okay, let's come up with something different. Let's come up with IPv6. Now, this hexadecimal is actually in 128 bits, which makes things just a little bit longer and adds quite a bit. So let's take this 2 to the 128 power, and we get a number that I cannot tell you how to say. Not even going to try, but I can guarantee you that in our lifetime, we will never use this address space. So we've come up with the solution of IPv6, but nobody really uses it. IPv6 is just a thing that's there, but when we get IPv6 addresses assigned, but still to this day, everybody's using IPv4. Well, how is that possible if we're using IPv4, but we're out of address space? Well, think about this. We're using something called NAT, which is Network Address Translation. Now, let's think about your network. So you might have a cell phone or computer or multiple devices. My network has at least 20 devices on it. I've got cameras, I've got multiple cell phones, smart TVs, everything that connects to my internet gets an IP address. And that's 20 IP addresses right there, right? So let's say I have 20 devices. That's 20 IP addresses. Am I taking up 20 IP addresses out of that 4 billion? No. We're actually using something called Network Address Translation, or it's called NAT for short. And we'll talk about this again when we set up our actual lab. But with NAT, what we're doing is we're assigned these private IP address spaces. So we've got this 192.168.57.139. Now, if you've ever seen a IP address before and you've been on a network, good chances are it probably started with 192. or maybe it started with a 10 dot or something along those lines. And that's because those are private IP addresses. So anything that starts with 192.168 is not an IP address that is going to be out in the interwebs. It is going to be an IP address that is only known to you. These are called private IP addresses. So because we use these private IP addresses, we can pass them out through what is called a public IP address. Now, to make better use of this, let's go out to Firefox, and I've already got a tab open. So I went to Google and I just said private IP addresses, and I clicked the second image here because I think it's a great image. So if we look at this, there are classes of IP addresses, private IP addresses. Now, there is a class D and E. We're not going to worry about those. The big three are class A, B, and C. If you know these, you are good to go. So if we look at class C, this is what the most common household and small business use. So we see it starts with the 192.168.0.0. So the 192.168 are constant. If you see a 192.168 address, you can guarantee yourself that that is a private IP address space. And then we have the range of changing this number between 0 and 255 and this number between 0 and 255. Why 0 to 255? Well, that'll all make sense when we get into subnetting. But what that allows us to do is have a large number of networks here and a small amount of hosts. But for a regular user like you or I, or a small business, 254 hosts is pretty good. I mean, I'm only using like 20 in my household. So the most common household is probably using this 192 address. But what about a big business, right? Something huge. Okay, well, they might use a 10 address because a 10 address frees you up to anything after this 10 is private. So 10.1, 10.1.1.1, whatever you want to put in here up to 255 on each octet makes for a small amount of networks, but a large amount of hosts. Okay, and don't worry about the host versus network thing. Again, subnetting, we'll talk about that. It'll all make sense. But just imagine the amount of hosts that you can put in here with this wide range. So because of this, you'll see larger corporations using 10 addresses. You'll also see a lot of corporations, even small businesses, using 10 addresses. The matter of fact is, as long as you have this private IP address, you're good to communicate across your network. So any IP address outside of these and the loop back here are free game for the public address space. They're probably already owned, and you purchase those or rent those really from your ISP, your internet service provider. So going back to this thought, we have a class C address. My network's class C, 192.168.57.139 here. So it falls into that class C. I've got all these devices on this 192.168 network. All these devices are talking out of one IP address. That is my public IP address. That is what I rent from my ISP. And all of this network traffic goes out one IP. So this is how we have achieved or solved the issue of running out of address space without having to use IPv6. Not that there's anything wrong with IPv6. It's not pretty. I mean, it's way easier to type this stuff in than it would be to type something like this in. But at the same time, this is how we've solved it. We're able to still use IPv4 in mostly all networks, and we are able to communicate out with this quote-unquote IP address shortage. So hopefully that makes sense. We're going to build upon these concepts. Again, IPv4, IPv6 IP addresses are layer 3 protocols. Layer 3 is a router. So when we route traffic, we route via an IP address. So we're going to build upon that as well as we go in. Hopefully this is all just a refresher to you. So that is it for this video. I'll go ahead and catch you over in the next one. All right, so we're going to move down a layer here and talk about layer 2. So remember, IPv4, IPv6, IP addresses as a whole, that is layer 3. We're talking about routing. Here in layer 2, we're going to be talking about a MAC address or a physical address. Now, MAC stands for Media Access Control, and that is identified here in our ifconfig as this ether here. So we could think of this as our physical address, and a way that we communicate when we are using switches. Switches communicate over this physical address. This is kind of how they know what device is what. So what we say here is if we have a device, say you just built a computer and you're installing your network interface card or your NIC, you're going to plug that in and you're going to have a MAC address for that NIC. Your cell phone, that's going to have a MAC address. Anything that's using a network interface is going to have a MAC address. So these MAC addresses are important because they utilize layer 2 or switching, and they are how we communicate over switches. Now there's something to be noted briefly about MAC addresses. Now MAC addresses have identifiers. So as you can see here, this MAC address has 6 different pairs of 2, right? And what we can do is we could take the first 3 pairs and we can just copy this and we can go out and we can try to put it into a MAC address lookup. Now for this one, this is just going to be VMware. I'm not sure if it's actually going to come up, but I'm going to go ahead and paste it and see what happens. And you can see that the vendor actually shows up as VMware. So the first 3 pairs here are identifiers. And we can identify what we're up against. If you've ever looked in your house and you've looked at your network and you're trying to find a device and you see the IP address, but the IP address doesn't really help you identify it. You might see something along the lines of a MAC address because your home device, say your router, might also be what's called a layer 2/layer 3 device, meaning it's doing switching and routing for you. And it'll also know the MAC address of that device. So you can take the first 3 pairs here, put those into the Google machine and see if you can identify what that device is. So if I was unsure, this didn't have a host name or device name, and I could just reach out and say, okay, well, let me look these up. Maybe it'll give me an inkling. It's not going to tell me the exact device, but if I know it's running VMware, then I can say, oh, that's my host machine running. Or if it's related to like Texas Instruments or something, maybe I know that device in my house. So this is just a quick way to look up devices and know about them. The other option or other thing that you need to know here is just that, again, MAC addresses, layer 2, related to switching. I'm just trying to repeat this and get this into your head. So that's all we need to know from this lesson. And we're going to go ahead and I'll catch you over in the next lesson. All right, so now we're moving into layer 4, which is the transport layer of the OSI model. And we're going to talk about what is TCP and what is UDP. So we'll type that in here, TCP versus UDP. So TCP is what is known as the Transmission Control Protocol. And you could think of that as a connection-oriented protocol. And we also have UDP, which is the User Datagram Protocol. And this is a connection-less protocol. So when we have these two protocols, one is best suited when it comes to high reliability. That's TCP. TCP is connection-oriented. We want to make a connection, we need high reliability. So you can think of something like a website, which is HTTP or HTTPS. Or you can think of something like SSH or FTP, the file transfer protocol. Those all utilize TCP. When you think about UDP, you might think about something like a streaming service, that's connectionless, or DNS is connectionless, or voice over IP is connectionless. And when this comes into the importance of scanning is super important. We're going to be scanning both TCP and UDP as a penetration tester. And don't worry about scanning right now. When we get into the scanning section, this will make a lot more sense. But we need to know what TCP and UDP are and define them broadly. So the most commonly used protocol that you're going to be scanning is going to be TCP. Now TCP works on what is called a 3-way handshake. Now if we look at the 3-way handshake, it's going to look something like this. We're going to first send out a SYN packet, and then we're going to receive back a SYN ACK packet. And finally, we're going to send an ACK packet. Now, how does this work? Now, you could think of this as an interaction. So let's say you have a friend or a neighbor, and you go to your neighbor and you say hello. That's a SYN. Now, SYN ACK is going to be the response. It's going to say, hey, SYN, I acknowledge you. That's your neighbor waving hello back. And then you know you are good to go start a conversation, so that's the acknowledgement. Now when we think about this in the terms of ports, now port is a item that can be open on a machine. It's a way to communicate with certain protocols. For example, if you think about HTTP, that's over port 80. If you think about HTTPS, that's over port 443. There's a lot of different protocols, and there are 65,000 plus ports that can utilize these protocols. So everything related here has to do with these ports. Now let's say that you want to connect to port 443 on a website. You're going to send out a SYN packet to that website. You're going to say, hey, I want to connect to you on port 443. And if 443 is open and available for connection, they're going to say, hey, you can go ahead and connect to me. And when you want to actually establish that connection, you're going to send that acknowledgement packet back. Now, let's make more sense of this. Let's go ahead and open up a tool called Wireshark. So this is built into Kali Linux. I'm just going to type in Wireshark, and I'm going to provide an ampersand here just so I have shell access if I need it in the background. And all I'm going to do is capture packet data. So this is going to be listening in on my NIC, and it's going to say, hey, what's he doing? Let's capture all that data. So we're going to capture that. I'm going to start a capture here. You're going to start to see a bunch of traffic coming through. You can see the different protocols here. You can see UDPs coming through right now. But we're going to go establish a TCP connection. So let's go out to the World Wide Web. And I've got Google up. I'm just going to refresh Google. You're going to see a lot of traffic start coming through. So I'm going to go ahead and just stop this right here. Look at all the data packets that get sent when you're using your computer. This is what's going on in the background. You don't even think about it. So we could see some synax there. Those are in the gray. Let's see if we could find a good one. Okay, so here is one right here. So what we're going to do, actually, let's find a better one. So we're going to come down to here, and we're going to say, okay, so here we are. We're our source IP. This is 192.168.57.139. We're going out to destination of 74.125.21.155. We're saying, hey, I've got this port here. I want to connect to your port. So port 443, this is a web page. We're sending a SYN packet. If that port is open and available for connection and communication, what's going to happen back is that IP address is going to say, hey, here I am. I'll allow you to connect on this port. And if we make that final connection, we're going to go ahead and send the ACK packet back, which is right here. It's going to say ACK. So that is the three-way handshake. Please do remember this is going to come back into play when we get into scanning, and we'll talk about stealth scanning and how we modify the three-way handshake to actually do some scanning. So that is it for this lesson. I will catch you over in the next one. All right, so before we go into the OSI model, I do want to talk about some common ports and protocols. Since this is a refresher, most of these should be pretty familiar to you. I'm going to run through them pretty quickly and just talk about them briefly on each of these common ports. And the reason I've listed these is because there are things that we'll see quite often as a penetration tester, and it's just something that as we're going through the course, if one of these show up, it's something that just rings a bell, and you see a scan, it comes back, and you see port 21, you just think, ah, yes, FTP. Or you see port 80, you think, ah, yes, HTTP. So you got to start training your mind to memorizing these ports. So when we get into our scanning, which again, we haven't covered scanning, but when we get there and we see what ports are open on a machine, we're going to be able to have these common ports memorized. So on the TCP side, we've got FTP. FTP is the file transfer protocol. You're going to see this in some assessments. You're going to see this a lot when we do something called capture the flag, where we run through some test machines. You'll see FTP open quite a bit. So FTP, file transfer protocol, all that means is we can log into this server, we can put a file, or we can get a file off the server. Now SSH and Telnet kind of play hand in hand. Telnet is the ability to log into a machine remotely. Now SSH does the same thing. The only difference is SSH is the encrypted version of that. So with Telnet, you are in clear text, and with SSH, you are encrypted. Now SMTP, POP3, and IMAP all relate to mail. We're not going to worry too much about mail in this course, but you might see it come back up at some point. So just remember your 25, 110, and 143. DNS. So DNS is a way to resolve IP addresses to names. And we could take a quick look at that if we go back to our Kali machine and say we're at Google here. We've got Google up, but the computer doesn't really know what Google is. The computer is just using nice text like google.com for us, the humans. What's going on the back end is Google actually resolves to an IP address. Now that IP address is how the computer knows to get back and forth. Because we don't want to sit there and type in IP addresses, this DNS or domain name system has been implemented for us. So we type in google.com. On the back end, it knows, hey, I want to go out to 179.10.22.34, whatever it is in reality. But this is just a quick way for the computer to relate to a human and the human to have easily readable access to some of this stuff. So going back to our PowerPoint, we have HTTP and HTTPS. That is a website, just what you saw there. Mostly everything is on 443 now, or HTTPS. The HTTP on port 80, you'll see sometimes. Remember, that is the non-secure version of the protocol. So HTTPS is encrypted, HTTP is not encrypted and not secure. So lastly, SMB ports 139 and 445. Originally, it was just 139. In the later versions of Windows, they've put on 445. You're going to see these ports a lot. This is probably the most common port you're going to see as a pen tester. These relate to file shares. You might also hear this called Samba. So there are a few names for it, but when you think of SMB and you see 139 or 445, think of file shares. And as a pen tester perspective, you got to think about all the crazy exploits we've had regarding SMB. The most recent one as of this course was the WannaCry virus, right? So you had the WannaCry virus. It's also known as Eternal Blue, was what it was built off of, or MS17010 was the official term of that exploit. That exploit utilized an SMB exploit to navigate through networks. So it became very vicious very quick because SMB is open so frequently on networks. Now, on the UDP side, we also have DNS over here. DNS is both a TCP and UDP protocol. We also have DHCP. Now, when it comes to IP addresses, DHCP associates you with an IP address kind of at random. Now, you could have the opposite of that is what is a static IP address. So with DHCP, you plug into your network, say your home network, and the internet just fires up. Guess what? Probably DHCP on the back end. It just picks a number between a range, says, hey, here's your IP address. I'm going to let you lease that out for 8 hours or a day or a week or however long the timing is set for, and that IP address is yours. Now, the opposite of that, again, is static. So you could say, hey, I want a static IP address, and anytime I plug in with this specific computer, go ahead and give it this IP address. So how are we going to know that? Most likely the MAC address, right? So from layer 2, it's going to know layer 3 and how to assign it. So again, DHCP should be pretty familiar to you. We've also got TFTP on port 69, which is the trivial FTP, and it utilizes UDP instead of TCP. And we also have SNMP, which is the Simple Network Management Protocol. So you will encounter SNMP occasionally on networks, not always, but when we do encounter it, there may be some information to be gathered, especially if there are strings being used that are community or public strings. And we'll worry about that when we encounter it, but you'll probably see it again in this course. So that is it in this video. We're going to go ahead and move on to the OSI model and tie all this together. Then we'll get into a little bit of subnetting, and we'll end this with a refresher on networking, a final video on networking. So I'll see you over in the next video. All right, so this whole time we've been talking about networking, and I've been throwing terms at you, and every time I throw a term at you, I try to use the respective layer for it. So you've heard me say layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, and those all correspond with what is called the OSI model. Now, if you're ever in a network interview, or if you're ever talking to somebody who has experience in networking, or even if you're on the help desk taking tickets, knowing the OSI model is incredibly helpful, and people will just throw layers at you. especially the people who have been in the field for quite some time, might just say layer 2 instead of a switch, or they might say layer 3 instead of a router. So I'm going to discuss the OSI model really quickly, give you a mnemonic on how to remember it, and just talk about some of the concepts within it and how to troubleshoot down it as well. So I picked this up from Keith Barker a long time ago, great trainer by the way, and this is the mnemonic. So we're going to go P, D, N, T, S, P, A. And this stands in my head for please do not throw sausage pizza away. Again, that is please do not throw sausage pizza away. So I'm going to put numbers corresponding to the layers in front of it here. And we're going to go ahead and type these out one by one. So on the first layer here, we've got what is called the physical layer. And you could think of your physical layer as like data cables or like your Cat6 cables, stuff like that. Something you might plug in, right? That is the physical layer. And we've already talked about layer 2 quite a bit. Layer 2 is the data layer, and that is our switching, right? And also our MAC addresses. Going down the list, we've got the network layer, which is IP addresses. Also routing. The fourth layer is the transport layer, which is TCP, UDP, which we have talked about as well. And the last few, so the session layer. We've got the session layer, which is just session management. You don't really have to worry too much about this one. 6 is the presentation layer. Now, this should be familiar to you because think about WMV, JPEG, movie files. That's what your presentation layer is, so media. And then lastly, we've got the application layer, which is like HTTP, SMTP, your applications that you utilize, right? So we've got this laid out here, and you might be asking, why is this important? Well, again, when we say something like, my home router is a layer 2-3, so that means it does switching and it does routing, right? You might think of this in another way as well. You might be asked to troubleshoot. And something to talk about too with the OSI model is when we receive data down this physical layer all the way down to the application. When we transmit data, it goes out the application layer down to the physical. When we're troubleshooting this, it is always best to start with the physical and go down to the application level. Okay, so say you're working help desk and you get a phone call and somebody says, my internet's not working, help me. Well, what's the first thing you're going to do? Are you going to ask them application level questions? Yeah, probably not. You might say, hey, can you look at the back of the computer? Do you see the cable plugged in? Oh, the cable's plugged in. Okay, well, do you see the where the cable's plugged in? Is there a blinking light? Is that blinking light green by chance? Okay, we're checking the NIC, right? And then we might ask them to, do they have an IP address? What's going on? All the way down. And then we troubleshoot all the way down to layer 7. So we wouldn't start on layer 7, right? We would start from the basics and move down. So it's important to know this. This isn't a help desk course by any means, but it's super important to know this, especially if it's been a while since you've seen this network stuff, or even if this is new to you, that the OSI model is commonly referred to. Even as a pen tester, I get all kinds of layer 2, layer 3 talk, and you will be sitting in meetings with network engineers, with people who are very, very smart about this stuff, and they're going to throw all this lingo at you. So if you know this lingo, really, really benefits you, or else you're just going to sit there and wonder what the heck they're talking about. So hopefully this is a quick, informative method for you. And again, remember, please do not throw sausage pizza away. That's the easiest way that I remember it. You can make up your own mnemonics if you want. People have other things as well. If you've got a favorite mnemonic, please feel free to comment down below and tell me your mnemonic as well. So I'd love to hear some of these other ones. So let's go ahead and move on into subnetting, and then we'll start moving into other fun parts of the course. Let's talk about subnetting. So subnetting is important in networking. You hear about it all the time. You hear even people perhaps freaking out. I know I freaked out when I heard that I had to do it for exams like Network Plus or CCNA. And I feel like there are a lot of complicated methods out there for subnetting, but there was a method that was shown to me middle of my career and it just blew my mind. It's really, really fast subnetting method. And I really want to break down for you what subnetting is, why we do it, and then show you the methodology behind it. So if we want to talk about subnetting, if we just come in here and just do an ifconfig, and we look at our IP address, right? We have our inet, which is our IPv4. And you can see here too, we have this net mask. This is also known as a subnet mask or a subnet. And it just says 255.255.255.0. Doesn't really tell us a lot if we don't know much about it, but this is what a subnet looks like. And we can think of subnets in ones and zeros. It's all bits, right? So we've got 8 bits here, just like an IP address, IPv4, same thing. 8 bits, 8 bits, 8 bits, and another 8 bits. And we've got ones and zeros. If all the ones are switched on, we've got 255. If none of the ones are switched on, we've got 0. And depending on how those ones and zeros are switched on or off determines a lot of things for us. And that's why this net mask is important. Now, attached to your resources for this course, I've created an Excel sheet that I think will be useful. So if we look at the Excel sheet, here is the CyberMentor's subnetting sheet. And let's talk through this. It looks like a bunch of numbers and it might look crazy for you. And we're going to talk about how this breaks down, how the bits break down, and then how I would write this shorthanded for an exam or a test or just something that I do on a day-to-day basis. So first, let's talk about the bits. So come to the bits tab here, and we have our 8 bits, right? We can count this across, and there's 8 here on the count, and you can see that. And it starts with 128 and descends down to 1. You just keep cutting it in half, right? So 128, 64, 32, 16, 8, whatever. What's more important is why we get to these numbers. So if we have a 1 switched on here, it adds to the value. When all the ones are switched on, it equals to 255. You see all the ones switched on here. If we were to highlight over all this, come down to the sum, you see the sum is 255. That's all this formula is doing here. So if we were to come through and you see all the zeros here, nothing's flipped on to actually turn any value on here. How this actually works is the switch has to be on in order, right? So if we were to switch on another bit, we'd have to switch it on here. And we'd have to switch another one on here. We couldn't just come down here and switch it on here. It wouldn't make sense. It doesn't work that way, not with subnetting. So we're going to take these back off and just show zeros again. But you see how the values change. If, for example, we had this network and you saw the default, and I'm showing you the 255, 255, 2550, this standard here, because that is what's known as a /24 network. That's very, very common. And it's very common because it's used mostly in households and small businesses. And it's done this way because of the amount of hosts that it allows. Now, if we talk about the host, you can see that I have here 2 to the 8th power. Why do I have that? Well, we actually go by how many bits are switched off or how many hosts are available to us. So if a host here or a bit was switched on, then we lose the amount of hosts we have available to us. And this subnet gets smaller and smaller. Now, don't worry too much about the ones and zeros. It's going to make a lot more sense when we stop talking in these binary terms. I just kind of want to break down the math behind it first before we make it really, really simplistic. So again, we're talking about what's called this /24 or WAC24 network. And it's so standard because of the host. Again, 256. Think of all the devices in your house. You have cell phones, you probably have computers, you might have like a Roku or Amazon Fire or something along those lines. You might have smart TVs or smart watches or something that connects to the internet. Well, again, they're all connecting through NAT, right, and going out, but the amount of hosts that you can have on your private network really depends on this subnet mask and how you set it. So we have this class C that you saw before, the 192.168.1 or .0 or however you want to have it, right? Well, it allows us to have 256 when we have a subnet of /24. So that's very common for a household. It's also common for a small business. Maybe there's a printer, some few devices in there, but they're never going to get over this 256 hosts. Okay, so when we come to the subnet cheat sheet, let's break this down a little bit differently. So we have our host here. Let's start with the /24 where we just were. And you saw that there is 256 available hosts as we start turning off bits. Okay, we turn off a bit here, we turn off a bit, keep going down the list. The hosts start getting bigger, and that just corresponds here. We have a /24, and the only reason I'm saying 24 is I'm counting the ones across, right? So we got 24 bits switched on. If we had 23, okay, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, let's stay away from the ones and zeros. I think it's a little bit complicated. The better way to think about this is to look at the subnet mask down here. And I'm going to replicate this, and then we're going to come back to it. So what I do here is we can have a possibility of 32 bits switched on, right? So I'm just making a new tab, and I'm just going to go over here, and I'm going to hit Control and drag this across till it hits 8. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing with 9. I'm going to drag it across. All I'm doing is just making, really quickly, 32 placeholders. And I'm just emulating here if we had the possibility of 32 different switched on bits. So imagine one bit is switched on, imagine all 32 bits are switched on. That's the possibilities here, right? So always, for sure, we're gonna have an amount of hosts, and we're gonna have a subnet mask, okay? So we'll just call it subnet there. We always start here with 128, just like the bits that you saw. You saw the 128 start on the bits. Let's just start also with 128. Now, as you saw, every bit that's switched on, remember when we switch a bit on over here, it starts decreasing. So we're going to decrease for the bits that are switched on. 64, 32, 16, 8, 4, 2, 1. You come over here, and what I like to actually do is I like to just add these numbers together. And you can see 128 and 64 is 192. And then you can add these two together. So you get 192, 32. You just add diagonally is the way I actually always do it. So 224, 240, 248, 252, 254, and 255. Now, what does that correspond to? It corresponds to the possibilities of the bits being flipped on, right? So this looks just like what you see here. Same deal. And if you had a 1 underneath of it, okay, then you got 128. If you've got another 1 underneath of it, well, guess what? You've got 128 plus 64, which is 192. And this number keeps growing. Why is this important? This is still all ones and zeros, right? Well, let's start thinking about it. If we have a /24 network, we've got 24 bits turned on. Our subnet mask is 255.255.255.0. If we had a /16, it becomes 255.255.0.0. Why? Where are these changes coming from? Let me show you this. Okay, for a /8, I'm just tying this into just this right here. Well, this is coming from the number of bits that are turned on. 8 bits turned on, we've got 255, and the rest are zeros. You got another 8 bits turned on, 255, 255, the rest are zeros. Come down to this /24, which is that really common subnet that you see, and you've got 255, 255, 255, 0. Now, this is very common, okay? Let's go back to the cheat sheet now. And you can see that I've got X as a placeholder in the subnet. So what I'm saying here is you look at this list and you say, I've got a /1. Well, for this whole area here from 1 to 8, the placeholder is going to hold in place of this X. So for a /1, if I've got 128, then guess what? It's going to become 128.0.0.0 because that's how it would be. And if you turned on just one bit here and made all of these zeros, guess what? Just the 128 would be on, the rest would be zeros. Okay, if we had a /14, okay, so 255's automatically flipped on. You have a /8 already, you passed through it. Okay, so you're starting on the second iteration here. /14 corresponds down here to 252. So you'd have a 255.252.0.0. So all this is placeholders. Let's go back to the sheet here. So I make this quick and dirty list. This is what I write out when I'm just writing out something quick for an exam. I'll write out 1 through 32. I'll put the host here and I'll put the subnet here. So again, if we know that once we cross through 8, 16, 24, 32, that has a 255 in front of it, all we've got to do then is we'll say /27. Well, we've come through 3 columns. Then I know for sure that we've got 255.255.255. something, right? You see the /27, you come down here, the subnet would be 224. Say 28. Okay, 255, 255, 255. Look at the 28, you've got a .240. And this is going to be confusing. Subnetting is not necessarily easy. Once you get the chart down, it makes a lot more sense. So let's start piecing some more things together. When I say that I've got host, now the hosts that I'm showing you only correspond to these first rows, but it's very common or very useful just to know this number right off the bat. Now, if you look at the cheat sheet, what you can do here is you just know that you start with a 1 or you start with the 128 and you go down, but every time you go up, you're doubling. And why are we doubling? Do you remember from the bits part? Every time a bit is turned off, so as we go up a number, we take it to the next power. So we've got 8 bits turned off. We take 2 to the 8th power, it's 256. Well, here you go. Look, come through here, 256. We go to the 9th power, 512, to the 10th power, 1024. It just keeps doubling, okay? That's all you got to think about in your mind, is it keeps doubling. So on an exam, for example, you might have something like, how many hosts could be potentially in a /20 network? And you come to your cheat sheet that you made or you have in your head and you say, well, 496, and then we'll get to this in a minute, but we have to subtract 2. So 494 potential. And why is this all important? What do we even care about any of this? Why am I rambling on? Well, you need to know based on the network. Okay, the /24 is great for a small office, home network, however you want to have it. But what if you're a large enterprise? Maybe you have thousands of devices, okay? Maybe you want a /16 network. That might make more sense for you. Or you even see some with a /8 network. It just depends on how big the company is. The larger the company, the greater chance that you're going to see that they're not using /24. Or they could even have subnetted segments of their network where, say, they have just telephones and they've got 500 employees and 500 telephones. They might just have one /23 network for nothing but telephones because that's the amount of hosts that fit in there. So what we're after with subnetting is how many hosts can we fit and what is the mask that's behind it? So those are questions you might be asked in an exam, and these are questions that you're just going to see. And when you're given addresses, say you're doing a pen test for a client, you might be given something like this. You might be given an IP address, 192.168.1.0/24. Okay, and immediately in your head, you're like, oh, /24, that's standard. There could be up to 256 hosts or 254 hosts or devices in this network. But if they gave you something like 192.168.1.0/20, then you might look at your little chart and say 4,094 hosts. Remember, we're going to subtract 2. 4,094 hosts in this network. Now I know if I'm scanning this, I'm up against a lot more devices potentially than I am in this. Okay, so when a client gives you your subnets, they might just write it out like this. And depending how big your client is, might depend on how big their subnets are for you. For example, I just pen tested a client that was a /16 all the way across. And it looks something like 10.1.0.0/16. Okay, and your subnet mask for that would be something like 255.255.0.0. And how does this come into play? Well, every time you have a 255, that number's locked in place. That's another way to think about this. So that 10 is always locked down. This 1 is always locked down. The rest of the bits are fair game. Meaning we could have 10.1.1.0.1.2.3. We could actually have a 0 here. 0.1.2.3.4. And that's how this number for like a /16 gets so big, because you have 10.1.0.0 through 255 on the possibilities, which equals 256 hosts. Okay, for one range, you get 256. Well, imagine you have to do that 255 other times, right? And that number gets substantially bigger here. And then if you were to have a /8, then of course it gets bigger and bigger. So what you need to realize are a few things here. We have these addresses, and you see the /1, /8. Again, we call them WACs. WAC 24 is going to be very common. I would say WAC 16 is probably your next common. You might see some weird subnetted networks like this, but typically it's /24, /16. Now, your network ID is typically what is known as your first address, and your broadcast ID is known as your last address. This is not always the case, but it is very common. And let me log back into this Kali machine here and I'll show you. So we have our IP address, 192.168.57.139. And we've got a net mask of 255.255.255.0. What does that tell you from what we just learned? That tells you we have a /24 network. Okay, this is a common network. There are potentially 254 hosts. Why do I keep saying that? Why do I keep subtracting 2? Well, we've got a network ID and a broadcast ID or broadcast IP here. Well, what we need to know is we are .139. We could be anywhere from .1 to .254 within this network. That's our 254 possibilities. This 0 means we have the flexibility to be any IP address range from 1 to 254. Usually a .0 for this IP here and a .255 make up your network ID and your broadcast IP, okay, usually. So if we were to say something along the lines of, let's go back to this Excel document, and we were to say something along the lines of this. Let's say that we have a /24 network, and we want to know how many hosts. We want to know what our network ID is and what our broadcast ID is, or IP is, okay? We would say, okay, and we'll give it one more. We'll say it's a /24, and the IP starts with 192.168.1.0, okay? Or we can even write it like this, 192.168.1.0/24, delete this, and we'll say, what's our subnet mask? What's our host? What's our network? What's our broadcast? So subnet, you come to your cheat sheet, you say, okay, /24, I already know that I need to be filling in this area here on the X, so I'm just gonna come in 255. What's the X? Well, we know to come down this row, 255 here, .0. Okay, and then we've got hosts. I'm just gonna expand this a little bit. We've got the hosts. Okay, hosts are right here, 256 hosts. Potentially 254 though, because we always subtract 2 from the host total. So our network ID is usually the first address available to us, which is 192.168.1.0. The broadcast is 192.168.1.255, meaning available to us is anything from .1 to .254. Let's take a look at something else. That's a basic example. Let's do like a /28. Let's say we got 192.168.1.0/28. Now what? Well, we've got 16 hosts here. Okay, so our subnet is then going to fill in 255.255.255.x, right? Because we're in this row. /28 says it's going to be a 240 when we drop down to the subnet mask. I'm going to make this a little bigger. How many hosts? 16 minus 2. We have 14 hosts. Okay, so the first non-host would be 192.168.1.0. Again, still the same thing. First address. Last address is going to be what? 192.168.1.15. Does that make sense? 0 to 15 is 16 addresses. Usable space is 14 because we take out the network and the broadcast. Now, you could see something like this, and then guess what? You're segmented. So because you're only using this little bit of space, you can then in turn have something like this, 192.168.1.16/28. And then it starts the same way. Your subnet mask is actually the same because you're using a /28. You come through, you can just copy and paste that. The hosts are still the same. What changes here? Well, your first address, 192.168.1.16.
and then your last address, which is 192.168.1.31. So because this is smaller on the /28 side, we can actually have multiple networks within, like, say, a .1, .0, .1, .16, .1, .32. You get multiple little networks here with only a small amount of hosts. So maybe you have just a few servers in this range, and you have like servers A, B, and C. They go in a /28, and then you have another one of servers D, C, and E, or D, E, and F, however you want to say it. And you have more in that range. Okay, so you can subnet this out into different things. And when we see subnets, we see all kinds of stuff. We could see phones, servers, user computers, wireless, all different sort of things. Some companies get really specific with their subnetting. Now let's try one more. Let's say we have a /23. Now I want to put in 192.168.1.0/23, but that would be wrong. Why would this be wrong? This is actually going to be a 0, and I'll show you why in a second. So we're no longer locking in this number anymore, right? When we get below the /24, the 255 all the way across for 3 of them, guess what? We're now have the ability to change this number other than what's locked in. So let's do a .0. We'll talk about why. Let's hit enter here. So a subnet on a /23. Well, we're going to do a 254, which is going to be the placeholder of the X here. We're going to come in and say 255, 255, 254.0. And now again, we're not locked in. So remember, this 255 would lock in this .1. That doesn't happen anymore. So we've got 255, 255, 254.0. We're actually going to start at 0 here. And we're going to say the number of hosts that are possible, it's 510. Okay, 512 minus 2. We'll say our network ID is 192.168.0.0. And our broadcast would then be 192.168.1.255. Why? Okay, so we have the possibility now that we're spanning 2 ranges. We've got 510 hosts in this network. Okay, and we have the ability to go between 0 and 1. We've got 2 options now, 0 and 1. So if we were to say another network, if we wanted to get to like a 2, we'd actually have to say 192.168.2.0/23. It would be the same subnet mask, same number of hosts, but then this would be 192.168.2.0, 192.168.3.255. Again, there's 510 possible hosts in between this, right? Because you got to think, .0.1, .0.2, .0.3, all the way through 254. And again, 1.1, 1.2, all the way through 254. So that equals 510. Once you've hit that maximum, that 1.255, then guess what? You start at 2, you have a whole new network here. Just like these smaller segments, you get whole new networks on the bigger side as well. So what you need to know is that if I were to put something like a 192.168.1.0/23, that would have fallen into line with the 1 and the 0, and our actual network ID still would have been 0.0, and a 1.255 would have been the broadcast here. And you can double check this. Anytime you're confused, you can double check your CIDR notation. So I'm going to bring over a website that I will show you here. And this is just an IP addressing guide. It's called ipaddressguide.com. You bring this over and you scroll down just a little bit, and I just put in 192.168.1.0/23, and you can see that it actually corrects me and says the first bit is 192.168.0.0, the last one's 192.168.1.255. Total host is 512 minus 2. Shows you that, again, first IP, last IP, you got your net mask. Very easy to use a CIDR calculator here, or an IP range to convert to CIDR as well. So very useful calculators, but if you're not allowed to use these for like an exam purpose or something along those lines, then using the cheat sheet that I've shown you is super useful. Now, what I want to do is I want to try 3 more subnets. Okay, I'm going to write these out. I'm going to say 192.168.0.0/22, 192.168.1.0/26, and 192.168.1.0/27. I want you to solve these for me. Tell me the subnet mask, the host, network, and broadcast. And with that being said, this again is a very complicated topic. I did not pick this up the first time or the second time that I got it. If you're running confused right now, perfectly normal. You can go back and watch this video again, try to pick up more topics, try to understand it. Maybe I'm not the right instructor for this either. I do recommend looking at other resources to completely fill in your knowledge gap if there is one that exists. Another resource that I'll link down is what is called 7-second subnetting. It is very useful. A lot of students have recommended it to me. I'm going to push it forward as well. So go ahead and try to solve this. Understand that what you're after here is just understanding what a subnet is. Okay, when you see something like this, if a client sends you 192.168.1.0/24, you're going to say, hey, okay, I know that there's probably 254 hosts in that network, and I know what I'm working with. If you see this 255.255.255.0, again, you know that you're working with a /24 network. Very standard stuff. That's what we're after. I don't expect you to ever memorize this. I don't have this memorized. Like, I don't come in here and say, you know, a /18 is a 255.255.192.0 network, and it's got 16,384 hosts. I don't do that. Okay, I have a cheat sheet. I'll use a website if I need to. For the most part, what you need to understand is 254 hosts for a /24. If that number has gone up to like a /28, you know you're dealing with less. If that number is lower, like a /16, you know you're dealing with a bigger network. That's really what it comes down to, unless you are working in networking, and then these become more important. But as a pen tester, understanding how to read this, understanding what the subnet is, and just identifying it with very basic measures, this is extremely useful. So I will catch you over in the next video when we talk about solving these challenges, and hopefully we got them all right. So I'll see you over there in the next one. All right, so let's solve this challenge together, shall we? We've got a 192.168.0.0/22. Why did I write this out this way? Well, similar to the /23. So if we come to a /22, we see that there are 1,024 hosts, which means we have a possibility of 1,022, right? And all we need to do is fill in the blank on the X. So 255.255.252.0. We come across, we know our first IP here, or ID, is 192.168.0.0, first address possible. Now, if we think about this, we can kind of do this mentally in our head. We can think, okay, there's probably 250 or so hosts in a network, and we've got 1,000 or so hosts here. Well, that's going to be about 4, right? 4 ranges, because we've got 1,000 divided by 250. So I'm going to go ahead and go 0, 1, 2, 3. That's 4 total. We'd say 192.168.3.255. And hopefully that math makes sense. Again, 0.0.1 through 254, .1.1 through 254, .2.1 through 254, .3.1 through 254. That equals about 1,022 hosts. Okay, actually, I lied to you. The only two we're taking off are 0 and 255. You actually have .0 through 255, 1.0 through 255, all the way. We're only subtracting these two. So if you do that math, that will add up to 1022. Okay, so a /26, we've got a 255.255.255.192. Fill in the blanks, fill in the X's. 64 hosts, well, we got 62 in reality. And we're gonna say 192.168.1.0 and 192.168.1.63. Again, if we wanted to create a second network, we could start here with a 64/26, and we would start with 64 as the network ID, and then 127 as the broadcast. And lastly, 255.255.255.224 for a /27. We've got 30 potential hosts because we got 32 minus 2, 192.168.1.0, and then we're going to do 192.168.1.31. Same thing here. If we wanted to create a second network, we could. we could say 192.168.1.32/27, and then this would start at 32, and this one would end at 63. We can make however many networks within that, 4 to 8, I think 8 different segmented networks with the /27. So that is it. Again, as I said last video, this can be confusing, and all we're taking away here is identifying what the CIDR notation looks like, identifying the base that to me is /24 being the most common, what you'll see, understanding what a subnet mask is and why it's important, especially in relation to hosts and the number of devices that you can have on a network, and why you might see something like a /28 or a /23, or more commonly something like a /16. So understand again that /24, as you see a bigger number there, or you see even, something other than 3 255s in a row, understand that the number of hosts are getting smaller. The less 255s you see on your screen, the number is getting bigger for the number of hosts. Okay, and just understand how to read this. That's all you need to take away. Again, I'm going to provide additional resources as I provided in the last video. Go review them. If you don't understand them, you can always come to the Discord channel. You can always ask Q&A questions. This is not an easy topic to pick up, but it is a topic that I had to show you as part of networking. All right, so in order to be successful in this course, we are going to be utilizing what is called a virtual machine. Now, virtual machines are known as VMs for short, and a VM is just a machine on top of a machine. And to give you an example, I'm actually running this Windows 10 instance that you see here on top of my Windows 10 instance. So here you can see, if I scroll up, that I have a Windows 10 machine. I also have a Linux machine sitting here. If I were to demaximize this, you can see that I'm actually running here a Windows machine in the back. This is my wife and I, and you come through here, we just blow it back up, and we're back inside of our machine. So a virtual machine is just a machine inside of a machine. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be utilizing this to build out labs. That way we don't have to actually have a bunch of hardware. We can just use this for our course and run what we need to on top of our own machine already. Now, this can get resource intensive. So if you are only utilizing something like 8 gigabytes of RAM, then you might have some issues with this, but you can still follow along. When we get into the Active Directory portion, you might run into issues if you do not have at least 16 gigabytes of RAM to utilize. But we'll worry about that when we get there. There are still plenty of ways to follow along throughout this whole course. So another thing to note is that I use VMs every single day. This machine that you see here is actually my day-to-day pen testing machine. So I run a Kali Linux instance on top of my Windows machine and utilize that to do penetration testing. So I'm going to demonstrate that to you and how we're going to build out our labs with that. And a lot of us in the industry run through VMs as opposed to running it directly on Metal or on a machine. So in order to utilize virtual machines, we first need some sort of virtual machine software to play these. So there are two different ways that we can do this. If you are on a Windows machine or a Linux machine, you can utilize VMware Workstation Player. Now, if you type in VMware Workstation Player in Google, the first one here that says download VMware Workstation Player, you just click on that. And if you are in a Mac environment, you're going to be utilizing Oracle VirtualBox. So if you type in Oracle VirtualBox, you come here and you go to Downloads. You have your option there as well. So in this course, I will be using VMware Workstation Player. I'm going to be running it on top of Windows. If you are using Mac, that is absolutely fine. You're going to be following along just the same. All you need to be able to do is follow the same instructions that I give you, and you will be A-OK. So if you scroll down here, you can see try Workstation Player for Windows or try Workstation Player for Linux. Go ahead and just select Download Now. That should bring up a download, and go ahead and save it. If you're doing VirtualBox, go ahead and download for OS X. I will download the Windows version just so that we can see what that looks like as well. So I'll save both of these. So let's view our downloads, and we've got VMware Workstation Player here. I'm going to go ahead and open this one, and we're going to install this. And this will be very point and click. So next, accept the agreement, possibly give away our first child. Yeah, we should go ahead and install the enhanced keyboard driver while we have this. And then we don't need to join any improvement programs or check for product update. That's okay. We will install desktop, start menu. You check your preferences as you like it. I'm just going to install this. And this should just finish here in just a second. Okay, then you'll be brought to this screen once everything's done. It should take about a minute or two. And we're going to go ahead and hit finish. And it's going to want a restart to take effect. You can go ahead and restart your system. I'm going to say no right now. Let's go ahead and install VirtualBox if you are a Mac user. We'll hit next. Next here. Next. And yes. And install. Accept. And again, very point and click with the installation. Select install and any options that do pop up. And then we can start Oracle VM if we want. Let's go ahead and just start that. This is what Oracle VM looks like. And let's see if we can start the VMware player here, even though we need a restart. And this is what VMware Workstation Player looks like. So here you can see that we have virtual machines. We can create new virtual machines, open ones, etc. We'll get into that in the next video. So again, if you are using Windows or Linux, this is probably what your view is going to look like for the rest of the time. If you are using Oracle on a Mac, this is what your view is going to look like. Another side pro tip here is that I am using Workstation Pro, and I might utilize this in some instances throughout the course. Other instances, I'll be utilizing the Workstation Player. They are not much of a difference, especially in the beginning. When we get into the Active Directory portion, it might actually be worth it for you all to download the VMware Pro trial, because the trial is 30 days and you can utilize that to get through some sections and actually have nice little windows here to be clean and just have a pro edition. You can do everything that I'm going to show you in the course on the player. It just is that you have to open, if you want to run more than one machine, you'll just have to reopen the VMware Workstation Player several times to run multiple machines, but that's okay. It just won't look like this nice clean layout where you can transfer between machines like I can do just here. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to the next video. We're going to be installing Kali Linux onto our VMware Workstation Player.
Now that we've installed VMware or VirtualBox, we need to install Linux. We're going to be using a version of Linux called Kali Linux throughout this course. This version of Linux is a Debian-based distribution which is geared towards ethical hacking and penetration testing. So it's a special version of Linux that allows us to have all the tools in one place that will allow us to hack without having to download these tools and install them on our own custom Linux distribution. So it's all kind of nicely built into one package. So if you go out to Google and you type in Kali Linux download, you should see this link. I'll put the link in the description below as well, but you should just be able to go to Get Kali right here. And you're going to be presented with a couple of options here. We're going to be using a virtual machine in this course, so we're just going to go ahead and click on this virtual machine option. And that's going to take us down just a little bit here. What you're going to do is you're going to download the respective version that you need. So if you need VMware, you download VMware. If you're using VirtualBox, go ahead and download the VirtualBox one. Now they have a direct download, which is a 7-zip, and they also have a torrent if you know how to torrent. What you're going to do is go ahead and download the file that you need. And while you're doing that, if you do choose to download directly, you're also going to need a tool called 7-zip or a way to unzip this file. So go ahead and start your download. While it's downloading, let's also go ahead and navigate to 7-zip. So if you go to Google and you look at 7-zip, you'll see this page here comes up. You just go to download. In here, you're going to download the file that is for your respective system. So here, I'm using Windows on 64-bit. I would download this executable right here. Now, if you're running on Linux, here's where you download Linux. If you're running on Mac OS, here's where you download for Mac OS. Very straightforward. I've already got this installed, but what you need to do is just download this and literally click next through it. Make sure you get it installed. Go ahead and pause the video, Once that is installed, 7-zip that is, and once you have the actual Kali image downloaded, go ahead and unpause the video. I'll be here waiting for you. Okay, so your next step should look something like this. You have your 7-zip file open. You should see a folder located in there. And the easiest thing is to just drag and drop this. You can also right-click and extract if you know where you want to extract it. I created a folder called Kali. I'm just going to grab this and I'm going to drag it over. And it's going to take a minute here, just a few seconds honestly, to unzip. The file size of this one, at least for the VMware version, is around 11 gigabytes or 11 gigabytes exactly unzipped. So make sure you have the space on your hard drive in order to do this. Now, once you have it unzipped, you can go ahead and just double click in here. You'll see a bunch of files. If you have VMware installed, you can actually just double click on this VMX file and that should open things up for you. I'm just going to show you the other way around doing this as well. So with VMware Workstation Player open, what you're going to want to do is go to Open a Virtual Machine. And in the folder that you have, you should see this VMX file as well. Again, you could double click it or you could just open it through this. What's going to happen is it's going to open that file here and you're going to want to edit this virtual machine settings. Once you have it loaded, click on Edit Virtual Machine Settings. And in here, we're going to want to first change the amount of RAM that we have. Now, this is dependent on your system. If you have like 8 gigs of RAM or maybe even 16 gigs of RAM, you might want to try leaving it at 2 at first. I'm going to bump mine up to 4 gigs, which is 4096. And I have 128 gigs of RAM, so I have more than enough space to allocate for this. But if you're on like 8 gigs of RAM, probably not the best idea to jack this up beyond 2. Honestly, I would try it at 1, maybe 2, see how it works. The other thing you're going to want to make sure of is that you're running on NAT network. So if you click on network adapter, make sure that it says NAT and that's selected. Once that's selected, go ahead and hit OK. And then you're just going to hit play virtual machine. When it asks you what to do, just say I copied it. Now from here, it's going to take a minute for this to load. You can just let this run through. It'll boot on its own. Once you are presented with the login screen, go ahead and unpause the video. But until then, pause, and I'll meet you back when you're at the login screen. Okay, I'm at the login screen. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger just so we can see. And from here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type in the username of Kali, K-A-L-I, and the password of Kali, K-A-L-I. Hit enter. And if you see this screen, congratulations, you have successfully installed Kali Linux and you now have it up and running. In later videos, we're going to cover what we're going to be doing and how to use this and how to use Linux and all this. But for now, pat yourself on the back. You've got Linux installed, and we're going to pause here and move on to the next video. Okay, so this video pertains to some updates we need to make to VirtualBox for quality of life. So if you're not using VirtualBox, you can go ahead and skip this video. If you are, buckle in. We just need to do a couple of quick updates and then we should be good for the rest of the course. So go ahead and go out to Google and Google VirtualBox Extension Pack. What it's going to bring up is just the downloads page of VirtualBox. So we're going to want to go here. And on this page, if you look kind of towards the middle, you'll see that there is a VirtualBox extension pack here. We're going to just click all supported platforms and that will automatically download the file that we need. So once that is downloaded, and pause if you need to, go ahead and open VirtualBox. And you can come in here and up at the top, we're going to go ahead and click on Preferences. And from here, we are interested in extensions. See extensions right here. Go ahead and click on that. There's a little plus sign. We're going to go ahead and click on that. And then you should have your downloads right here. So we're going to take the downloads and just go ahead and install that. Hit install. Read this. Give away your firstborn. Accept all the terms. And you should be good. Very quick install. Okay. The second thing we need to do is we need to come to the one tab up here above, which is Network.
We're going to go ahead and hit the network button, or this add button, and we're going to add what is called a NAT network. Okay, and we're going to come in here and we're going to double click. And you can go ahead and keep these defaults. I'm going to actually change them to 192.168.57.0 because that's what's going to be used through the rest of the course. And that is what the CIDR notation of my Kali machine and my Keyoptrix, which you'll see later, etc., all fell into this 57.0. So we're going to go ahead and keep it on this NAT network. Make sure you support DHCP. Go ahead and just hit OK. Hit OK. And then for a machine, and make sure any machine that you use, again, any machine that you use in this course, make sure you set it to NAT network if you're using VirtualBox. So you can come in here, click on a machine like this mail machine I have here. You can just click on that, settings, go to network, and then you can go ahead and just go to NAT network. All right. And that name right here, you see name NAT network. That's all we're going to use. That'll automatically set it up. So when you have a Kali machine running later and you have Keyoptrix or another box running, or even when we build out an Active Directory lab, you need to make sure that you're running that NAT network so that all of the machines are on the same subnet. If you don't, you might run into a situation where the same IP comes up for the same machine and then they're conflicting with each other, or you get on different networks and some weird stuff happens. So make sure, again, that it's imperative that you're setting that NAT network for every single machine that you're setting up. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next video in this section. The first thing I'd like to do before we get started with any commands or anything like that is just take a look around Kali Linux and kind of demonstrate why a pen tester or ethical hacker might use this distribution of Linux. Now, throughout the course, as stated in the last video, you might see a different version of this pop up as I recorded videos on some of the older versions. Everything should still work just as is. You just might see a different look and feel to some of the Kali interface, but all the commands I'm going to show you, everything that we do is going to be the same. So let's take a look and just explore Kali Linux just for a bit. So if we come up here into the corner and we just click on the little Kali logo, you could see that we have nice things broken out for us. So we've got these favorites up here, which we have our terminal, which we're going to be living in essentially. We've got a text editor, we've got a web browser, which is basically Firefox. We've got some other tools down here, docs, etc. The other thing that we can come scroll through is we can see that we have different applications in here. If we look at the different sections, these kind of go in order, which we haven't covered quite yet, but in the order of how a hack might go down. So information gathering is usually the first step. You can come in here, look through this, and here's a bunch of tools related to information gathering. You can even click into these and go deeper if you wanted to, related to specific things. So DNS or SMB or open source intelligence. All of this that's in here, this is just built-in tools. So let's say we're coming in here and we want to do a wireless attack. Well, we go to wireless attacks. We've got a bunch of tools already built in. So Kali Linux is just essentially a ethical hacking distribution of Linux, and it's built on Debian. So if you've ever used something like Ubuntu or anything along those lines of a Debian distribution, this is all going to feel really familiar to you with just a bunch of tools built in on top of it. So fairly straightforward. They do have some nice tools in here. You can come through and utilize these. A lot of this is already built in, and we're going to take a look at that as we go. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is, and throughout the rest of this course, is start looking at the terminal. So if you come up here, you'll see that we have a terminal. Now, mostly everything that we do is going to be done in this terminal here. Now, this is almost like accessing the command line. So if you're using a command line like in Windows, for example, if you've ever used a command line, if not, that's okay. But we do a lot of this from this interface as opposed to maybe utilizing a GUI-based interface where if we clicked a folder, this might look more familiar to you if you're a Windows or Mac user. You come in here, you have this kind of area. Yeah, we can do that, and sometimes we'll utilize this, but a lot of times we're going to be living right here. Okay, so as we move forward, we're going to start talking about this command line, how we can utilize it and use it to our advantage, and then we'll do some tips and tricks and hopefully learn some pretty neat stuff as we go. So in the next video, I'm going to cover the sudo feature, which I think is important. It's something that was brought in. Now, originally we had something called a root permission, and we'll talk about that. That has changed since 2020.1 moving forward. So we're introducing that into this course, and we'll talk options that you have. So let's go ahead and move to the next video where we talk about the sudo feature. All right, so before we look at any commands or learn any command line, we have to talk about sudo. Sudo is very important, and what had happened previously was that in the earlier versions of Kali Linux, we ran as a user called root. Root is the ultimate user. You could think of it as the administrator of the machine. Now we're running as a user called Kali, so we don't have root privileges directly. This is as an improved security feature because we should be running only certain commands when we need to as the root user. So what we're going to see is we're going to see how we can run commands as an elevated privilege, and we're going to do that with sudo, which stands for super user do. They just kind of shortened it, so we just have sudo now, okay? Now with sudo, what we're doing is we're saying, hey, I want to run a command elevated. I want to run this as a higher user. In this instance, we can say, I want to run the command as root. Why is that important? Well, let's take a look at an example. Let's say that I wanted to look at a very sensitive file. Now, one sensitive file in our system is the Etsy shadow file. You can see cat Etsy like this, Etsy shadow. And you don't have to follow along right now. You don't have to really understand what's going on if you've never seen Linux. All I'm doing is saying, hey, I want to print out this file. I want to look at it, okay? And for here, I can't see it. It says permission denied. You don't have the access to see this file. That's a good thing. But if I was the root user or somebody that had elevated privileges, I could see it. So I could say sudo cat Etsy shadow like this. Okay, and it's going to say, what is your password for Kali? I'm going to go ahead and say Kali, K-A-L-I. Hit enter. And now I can see that I have access to this file. And this file is very sensitive. We'll talk about this later on in the course, but sensitive file, okay? So when we're looking at it, I ran that command specifically as the root user. As the root user, I'm able to see, okay, this file now. Why, or what's going on here? Well, we're running that specific command, right? And we're still staying as Kali. We're doing this in a kind of one-off scenario. So there will be times where something that you run in this course might require sudo, or you can run the command without sudo, but you notice something doesn't work. So best practice for this is saying, hey, let's go ahead and just run mostly everything that I'm showing you command-wise in this course. That's not best practice overall. Usually you should run things just as a regular user. If you get permissions blocked, then run it as sudo as necessary. Now, the other thing to point out, and we'll talk about this again later on in the course, but why can we do this is because this user is part of what's called a sudoers file, meaning we can have this permission. Not any user can come in here. Say we made a new user and we just called the user John. We can't just take John and just go ahead and just run these commands as root. No, John has to have the permission to do this. So you can think of Kali as being an administrator, but only when we utilize that access or that privilege. Okay, the other thing I want to show you though is that we can switch over to root if we want to. We can come in here and we can say sudo switch user dash, just like that. And then I'll put us into root. Now you can see, okay, we're running root at Kali. And that's only for this instance. You can, if you want, I'm not going to demonstrate how to do this, but you can, if you want, change the root password, log out, and log back in as root, and run through this course as root. Again, that's not best security practice, but that feature is available to you if you are a Linux user that is comfortable with Linux, comfortable with running as root, and you want the easy path. Otherwise, I highly recommend just staying as Kali, running as sudo privileges as you need it, and then moving forward. But this is a quick way to switch into root if you need to. Sometimes even running sudo causes some issues, so switching to root to run a command is okay. What we can do here too is a demonstration is we can go file new tab and look at a new instance, and you'll see that this instance of root is only good for this tab here. Once we start a new tab, we're going to be brought back right back to Kali Kali. You can see that from the top line in the tab as well. So just keep note of this when you're running commands in this course. If you see something, again, try running it with sudo if it's not working, or if it says access denied, then you know, hey, I need to run sudo. Very, very, very important. Okay, I'm trying to drive that into your brains right now. So from here, we're going to move on. We're going to start looking at how to navigate around the file system, taking a look at everything from a bigger picture and diving into terminal. So I will see you over in the next video.
Now we're going to take a look at the Linux terminal. And if you're a user of a regular computer like Windows or even Mac OS, you are probably used to using what is called a GUI, or a graphical user interface. And we can do this with our version of Linux. We can come in here, and if we want to like go to folders, we can absolutely open this and go to folders. We've got the ability to go to Firefox. We've got all of our tools in here that we want to use or look at, and we have a graphical user interface. However, a lot of our time is going to be spent on the command line and using a terminal. So it's very important that we learn how to use a terminal in Linux. So looking at our terminal here, we can see a few things before we even get started. The first thing is that we have a Kali at Kali. What does that mean? Well, the first instance here is Kali. That is your user. So remember, when we first logged in as Kali, and that is our user. So if we ever switch over to root, we'll see root here. The second part of this is our host name. So our computer name happens to also be Kali. If you change your host name, you could say whatever you wanted to say here. The last little part of this is this a tilde. This is actually the directory that you are currently in. So this is a quick way to say, what user am I, what workstation am I on, and what directory am I in. Now we can take a look at what directory we are in with the pwd command, and that stands for print working directory. And in this instance, you can see we are in the home/Kali folder, and that is the equivalent of being in the tilde. So if you see the tilde, that just means you are in your user's home folder. So if we were a root user, we would actually be in the /root folder as opposed to the home Kali folder. So the tilde means something different for every user that you're on. The next thing we're going to look at is the change directory feature. So imagine that we are in our folder here. So if we go to like, I don't know, our desktop, and we're sitting in our Kali folder, this is really what we're looking at. So we're looking at Kali right here, and we want to get out of this Kali folder and change into another folder, say like, I don't know, downloads, for example. If we go into downloads, it's very easy to click into, but how do we navigate around on the terminal? I'm going to show you how to do that. So the first thing we're going to do is use the cd command. That stands for change directory. Now, if we do change directory ... that says I want to go backwards. So if I do that, now you can see that we are in the /home folder, but we can also do a pwd, print the working directory, and you can see that we are in the home folder. Now, can we go any further back? Well, let's try cd ... again. And now you can see we are at a /. If we do a pwd, we are at a /. And one more time, I'm going to cd ... and see if anything happens. Nothing happens here. We cannot change any further. We are in what is called our base directory. So if you see a /, think of that as the base folder. You cannot go any further back from that. Now I'm going to clear my screen. If you want to clear your screen, you just hit Control-L like that, and that'll clear the screen. And from here, we are going to look at what is in our base folder. And to do that, we can use a tool called list, which is ls. So from here, we can see different colors and different things. And we can tell based on the colors, though these color schemes are not the greatest in the newest Kali Linux, we can still see like, hey, this darker version of blue is actually a folder where some of these other things are actually files. We don't have to worry too much about that right now, but we just came out of the home folder. So we can see here that we have a bunch of files and folders. And let's say we want to go back to the home folder. Well, we can cd home. And I'm going to start typing H, and I'm just going to hit tab. And because there's nothing else in here with an H, we don't have to worry too much. It will just autocomplete to the home folder. Now, for example, if there's a bunch of L's, I'm going to back up really quick before I hit enter. If I wanted to try something that has multiple items in here, if I try the L and I hit tab, you're going to see that there's going to be a lot of options for me to go through. And depending on what you have is when you can autocomplete. So if I start typing LO, it should know that there's only one LO and I can tab and autocomplete the rest. So you just have to be able to get to a point where you can tab out. Or if you know the first letter of the file that you're looking for, you can hit tab on that and you can see, okay, here's where I need to be, or here's what I can look at with everything that starts with that letter. So I'm going to delete this and we're going to CD back into home. We're going to ls to list the contents of home, which is just our Kali folder. So I'm going to CD into Kali. And if I ls from here, you could see that I have our desktop, documents, downloads, similar to what we saw in the graphical user interface when we were in the folder. Now we can see it from our terminal. Now, before we go diving deeper into these folders, something that I want to look at is what if I wanted to get to this Etsy folder over here? So there's this Etsy folder that was in our base. Now, if I try to CD into Etsy from here, nothing's going to work. I'm tabbing, nothing works. If I try CD Etsy, it's going to say I can't find it. So what does that mean? Well, when we change directories, we can only change directories from the folders that we have available to us. So I can only change directories into these folders by using that sort of nomenclature. However, if I can provide a full directory or a full path, then I can CD from any folder that I'm in. So if I go CD /, because remember we have the base here, well then I can say /ET, start typing that out, and guess what? I get Etsy here. And if I wanted to dive deeper into what folders are in there, I could hit tab and I could see all the folders that are available in the Etsy folder to complete my task. Now, if I hit enter, I will be brought into the Etsy folder. And similarly, I can hit ls and see all the files and folders that are in here. Now let's just CD here, and I'm going to use the tilde, and that's going to get us back to our home folder. I'm going to Control L to clear screen, and then I'm going to ls again, and you're going to see we're back where we just were. Now, in this case, what if I wanted to list the files of the Etsy folder? Well, it's the same thing. I could do ls /Etsy, and that will list all the files as if I were sitting in that folder. So just know that you can list folders and files. You can change directories from being within another directory. It doesn't have to be in that same up and down tree that I was showing you. There's a lot more robustness to these commands. Same thing, if we ls in here, we could take a look at the folders, and we don't have to change the directory to see what's in these folders. We can just ls desktop, for example, and start auto tab completing. There's nothing in there. I do have something in the downloads folder just because I changed my picture. I put our TCM security logo in there. So I have that in the downloads folder, but it's completely normal not to have anything in your desktop or downloads when you first install Kali. And again, we can achieve the same thing by CDing into downloads and then hitting ls. You have the same object here as you saw before, except we're just now in that folder. So you have to declare the folder or be within the folder to see the contents. Okay, now let's go ahead and CD back to the base folder. You could CD ... or just use the tilde. I'm going to clear my screen. And from here, we want to talk about making a directory. So let's make a directory. I'm going to make a directory called Heath. You can just use your first name if you want. And then when you ls in here, you could see now that the Heath directory is here. And I could CD into that Heath directory. I can ls in that directory, and there's not going to be anything in there. So I'm going to go ahead and back up one. And now I'm going to show you how to remove a directory or remove a folder. So you say rm-dir, and you're going to go ahead and just say Heath, and that will remove that. These commands work exactly the same as everything else. If I wanted to make a directory in the base folder, I could totally make dir /Heath if I wanted to. And I could also remove that from here. So again, it doesn't matter exactly where you're at as long as you're using full file paths. Okay, so I've cleared my screen, and now I want to run ls. And you see in ls that we just have a bunch of folders, but that's not entirely true. What we're going to do is we're going to do an ls-la, and I like to think of this as list all, but really it stands for long all. And if we hit enter, you can see that there's a bunch of new files in here and folders actually. So from this, we can see that we have like a bash history. We've got a .java folder. Anything with a dot is considered a hidden file. We won't see that when we're using the ls command. We actually have to do a -la command. And this is a great time to actually take a look at what these subcommands are and how are some ways that we can identify what these things mean. So I'm going to show you a website first, and I think this website is awesome. We can go to something like explainshell.com. So it is explain shell. You can see it auto-completing up there, but explainshell.com. And if you came in here and you wanted to take a look, let me make this a little bit bigger. If you wanted to take a look at like ls-la, you could say, okay, explain this to me. And it'll tell you, okay, the first part is ls. That means list directory contents. Remember I called it the list command? That's what it is. Now, what does that la do? Well, the L, you hover over it, says use long listing format. And the A says use all. Okay, so do not ignore entries starting with a dot, which is what we're looking for. And the long listing just gives us more detail. It gives us these file permissions, which we'll get into a little bit later, and who owns it, and what the file size is it a directory, etc., etc. We'll get down into that in just a few videos. We can also use what are called man pages. I'm going to Control L again. If we do man ls, man stands for manual. So man ls, we could see in here that ls means list directory contents. Great. -a stands for all. Do not ignore entries starting with a period. Same thing as we saw before. We could scroll down, look for the L portion of this, and we'll see that we have use a long listing format. You can hit Q to quit this. So if you don't have internet access, for example, you can use the man pages. I like using explainshell.com. I think it's pretty awesome, but man works very quick. And from the terminal, you don't have to leave or do anything. Another thing that you can do is ls-help. And that will give you similar to the man pages, though not as full detail, I guess is the best way to say it. And you come in here and you can see the same kind of switches and commands that were in here. So --help works for a lot of commands. It's one of those that you should know and you should try if you have any questions about what you're trying to do. It's a great resource. So if we ls-la, we can cd into one of these hidden folders. Like we could cd into .cache, for example, and we just ls that. You can see that there's actually stuff in the cache in here. So we're not going to get into this. I just want to show you that hidden files and folders do exist. So if you're looking for something, especially pen test related, something might be hidden. If you're on a Linux machine, you might need to do ls-la to see a hidden file. And they're incredibly easy to see, as you can see for yourself. So let's go ahead and cd back to our home folder. And from here, I'm going to show you a couple of things that we're going to explain later on, but I just kind of want to get you familiar with it. So the first thing I want to show you is the echo command. If we go echo and we use a single apostrophe and we say hi like this, that's just going to echo out to the screen. We'll get into the echo command a little bit later on in the course. What we're doing here is we're going to echo this into a file. So I'm going to say hi, and then I'm going to put that file, I'm going to use this greater than symbol, and that's going to be a redirection operator. And I'm going to say, hey, just go ahead and make a file called test.txt. And while you don't need to know this yet, if I ran cat on this, on test.txt, you'll see that it prints back out hi. Okay, so I just want to have this file here that we created. And what we're going to do is we're going to just quickly ls. We're going to see that it's there. You can see that there are color differences for files and folders again. And the reason we're making this in this video is I want to show you the copy command. So if we run copy on this, we could say copy test.txt. What I want to do is I want to copy this into the downloads folder. So I can just say copy test.txt into downloads. If we ls, we'll see that test.txt is here. We're making a copy. If we ls downloads, we can see that test.txt is actually in there as well. So similar with the remove directory, we can use the rm command, and what we're going to do is remove that file. And again, we don't have to be in the directory to remove it. We can call the directory path and then test.txt. If we hit ls on downloads again, we can just go ahead and hit enter, and you're going to see that there is no test.txt in there anymore. But if we ls here, you'll see that test.txt does exist. So I'm going to go ahead and control L. The opposite of this is the move command. Now, if I move test.txt and I put that into downloads, if I ls now, you're going to see that there is no test.txt in here. Why is that? Well, if we ls downloads, you're going to see that we moved it. So remember, copy leaves an original version wherever you copied from. Move completely moves it. So the CP and the MV commands are what you need to know there. Now, while we're on this, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a command called locate. So locate's pretty awesome. If you did locate and say I wanted to find out where that test.txt file is, I could do locate test.txt, and we're probably not going to get anything back quite yet. Now, if we're looking through this, none of these files are where we're at. So there are some test.txt files on this machine, but we're not seeing the one that we created. So say that we created a file, we can't remember where we put it, and we just want to go search for it and find it. What we can do is we can say update DB, and you're going to see that we actually get a denied. Why are we getting permission denied? Well, this comes back to sudo. So let's go ahead and sudo update DB. You're going to enter in your sudo password. It's going to update the database. And now if we do locate test.txt, and you can just, when you see a screen like this, by the way, where it's kind of semi-gray, if you just hit the right arrow, that will go ahead and autocomplete because it remembers your last command. You can hit that. And you can now see that the first entry in here is home Kali downloads test.txt. So now the database is updated and it finds it. One other thing to mention, I just talked about auto-completing with the right arrow. If you hit the up arrow, you can go through your previous commands. You can see all the commands that I've been running through. So we can also use the down arrow to scroll back down through those commands. So say I wanted to run that locate test.txt command again. Instead of typing it out, I just hit the up arrow and then I hit enter. Easy breezy. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and remove downloads test.txt. And now that file should be gone. We can ls one more time into downloads just to make sure. And you can see that TCM security final is the only thing that's in there. One other thing to point out that I just noticed actually is these files are case sensitive and the folders are case sensitive. So if I try to CD into downloads, it's not going to work because downloads doesn't exist. So if I CD into downloads, like it's spell, then you can see that I actually get into the downloads folder. So note that it's case sensitive. Autocomplete, if I go back, will do a pretty decent job at trying on newer versions of Kali, that is. If I hit DO, for example, and then I tab, it'll realize that I'm trying to get to downloads. So the last thing I'm going to show you is the password command, and that is passwd. We are going to be good security engineers and change our password. We're going to make it a strong password because we're good security engineers. I am going to be the bad security engineer and make my password password. And I'm doing that because later on in the course, we'll talk about cracking Linux passwords, and we're going to use my bad password as an example. So here we're going to type our current password. Kali is a terrible password, by the way. And we're going to go ahead and type in our new password. You can make your password whatever you want. I'm making mine password. And now we have updated successfully, and we have finished all the commands that we need to know for this video. I'll go ahead and see you in the next lesson. Now we're going to talk about users and privileges. So in the last video, we learned about ls-la. So I am in my home folder, which is the tilde here, and all I'm going to do is just say ls-la. I'm going to hit enter, and we're going to see a bunch of stuff over here on the left-hand side. We've got this, we've got the details kind of ownership, we've got some file size in here, and we'll talk about all of this. But when we do ls-la, we're getting so much more information than whether or not a file is hidden, which is kind of the purpose we looked at it for last time. But now we can take it and look at it from a different scope or lens. We can see that we have this column here, the first column. Now the first column tells us something interesting. It first tells us whether or not we are looking at a file or a directory. So if we see a D here, we are seeing that this is a directory. Note that these are also color-coded, right? So we have blue for directories, it looks like, and then white here for files. And then we also have links, which we're not going to get into much right now, but a link looks like it's a lighter blue. So we have the indicator here first. It says, okay, it's either a D or maybe a dash or an L. There are other settings that could be here, but for now, this is all we need to worry about. The next set of things that we're going to look at are these RWXs or R blank X. What does that all mean? Well, RWX means read, write, execute. When we're missing one of those, like a dash here, that just means we have a read and execute. And there are actually three groups that we're looking at here. So we have the first group, which is the owner of our file. So this first group says read, write, execute for the owner of this file. And if we look at the owner of the file, we can actually see that the owner is going to be Kali. Well, in this instance, it's the directory. But here we're looking at Kali. You can see that one of these has root listed, but in this instance, since we're using the Kali user and we're in our home folder, we're looking at mostly Kali being the file owner for this. The next one we're going to look at is we're going to say, okay, group membership. So anybody that is a part of this group, what do they get ownership to, or what do they get to do with this directory or this file? Well, anybody in this group can read or execute, but they cannot write to this directory or file. And lastly, we have the third setting, which is all other users. What can all other users do? All other users can read and execute, but they cannot write here. And we don't have anything in here besides this link that is read, write, execute. We don't have a world read, write, execute in this folder, and that's okay. This does come into play when we're doing penetration testing, however. When we want to find some sort of file that has read-write access or read-write execute access. If we have full access, that is ideal, especially if there are some sensitive files that we're not supposed to see, or maybe we're misconfigured, or if we need somewhere to write to on the disk. For example, if I clear the screen here and we do an ls-la of the temp folder, we could see that temp actually has read, write, execute privileges throughout. This is a great place when we're doing pen testing and we're working on a Linux machine, that if we need to come drop a file, we know that this temp folder can be written to, we can write whatever file we want and execute these files from here without having to worry about too many permissions. So if we're attacking machines later on, especially as we get on into the practical ethical hacking course, you may see me go and use the temp folder to upload malware or write a malicious file or something that I can do from a folder that is read-write executable. So let's clear the screen again. Now, another reason and importance for the read, write, execute is that if we write a script, we won't be able to execute that script until we have full access to do so. That's going to become more important as we download files and try to run them against machines. But even in this little section, when we're looking at the bash scripting, we're going to need to be able to execute our script, and we're going to need to be able to change the permissions on that. Let's go ahead and do that here. We're going to create a little text file and just look at the permissions and how things change. So similar to the last video, we're going to do an echo, and we're just going to say hello. And in this, we are going to use our directional operator, and we are going to just put this in a hello.txt file. If we ls-la, we could see that hello.txt is in here, but look at the permissions that are set. We have read-write permissions. We don't have any execute permissions. If this was a script or anything that we're trying to run, the machine will not let us run it because we do not have the execute permissions. Same thing here. Everybody else can only read this file. They cannot write or execute this file. So we can change the permissions on this, and we can do that with the chmod, which stands for change mode. So I'm going to go ahead and clear screen again, and we can do a chmod. And there's two different ways to do this. The first way is to do something like a plus sign and then give the permissions that you want set for that file. So we could do something like RWX, that is read, write, execute. If you wanted just read access or read, write access or just write access, you would put the appropriate lettering there. And let's go ahead and just give this a read, write, execute. And I'm going to say hello.txt and hit enter. And we're going to go ahead and ls-la again. And now you can see that the color of this has changed. Why? It is fully read-write executable for us as the user. Okay, as the owner, I should say. So that's one way of doing it. However, there is another way of doing this as well. We can say chmod 777 hello.txt, hit enter, do an ls-la, and you'll see now that everything has read-write execute here. Well, what changed? What is this 777 and why is it so important? Okay, for that, we're going to jump over to PowerPoint for just a second. Okay, so we have different numbers that we can set for the chmod. And remember, we did 777 because we gave a 7 to each group. We had the first, second, and third groups. Remember that. Well, what does 7 mean? Well, 7 means read, write, execute. So for a read permission, we get 4 points. For a write, we get 2, and for execute, we get 1. So as you can see down here, we have 4 plus 2 plus 1. That equals 7. Well, if we had no permissions, that would be 0. So we could do something like a 700. You might see something like read only, and then you would just give it 444 across the board, for example. Or I've seen something like an SSH PEM file, and those files require specific permissions. Typically, it is 644. So that would say that the owner has read write, but no execute, and then the rest of everybody else has just read access to that file. So that would be a 644 permission. So if you ever wonder what the permissions mean, you can always refer back to a chart like this or quickly Google what do the chmod numbers mean. Just know if you want to give something full permissions, you are going to set 777 across the board. And if we're doing hacking or doing penetration testing, that's often what we're going to use, with the exception of PEM files where they have to have more restricted permissions, sometimes 644, sometimes actually 400 is what I've seen as well. From here, let's go back to our Kali machine, and I'm going to go ahead and Control L to clear the screen. Here, we want to take a look at adding a user. So we're going to do a sudo add user, and you can give whatever username you want. I'm going to just call this user John. It's going to ask for our sudo password. Remember, we changed our password, so make sure you put in the right password. And now it's going to say, okay, what password do you want to use for John? I'm going to go ahead and enter that, and I'm going to enter it again. And then you could just hit enter through all of this and get back to this screen where it says Kali at Kali. From here, we're going to go ahead and switch user and go into John. So just do su John. I'm going to ask for John's password. Go ahead and give that password. And now you can see that we are John at Kali. So what is special about John? Well, we've made a new user, and John has some permissions. Now, if we wanted to cat out like the Etsy password file, we can. And this is a very common file that you're going to look at as a pen tester. If you come in here, the Etsy password file is important. This is something that we can see a lot of information about this machine. Now, the Etsy password file is called the password file not because it has our password in it, but because it used to store our password in it a very, very long time ago. Now what is being done is they put an X here for a placeholder, and that placeholder is then filled in with the shadow file, and we'll take a look at that here in a second. So we are using the cat command, and you've seen me use this several times throughout the course. We are using that to basically print out a file. So when we print out the file, we can read the file. So from here, we're reading the file and we're saying, okay, I see root. Root is the 0 user ID, and that is important. That's telling us they are the ultimate user on the machine. They are user 0. If we scroll way down to the bottom, we should see some users that were created here. For example, we see Kali. Kali is user 1000, pretty common. We can also see that John is in use here, and John is user 1001. We could see what type of shell type they're using and what their home folder is as well. You could see the ZSH shell type compared to John's bin bash. So they are different shell types, and we'll get into those a little later on. But from here, we can also see roots here. We can see the root shell type, and we can also see what kind of services are running on this machine. So if you want to find the users, I typically look at root, and then I look and scroll all the way to the bottom to see what's been installed besides what's on this machine. So in here, we can see some things like SSH, which is important. We know, okay, this has the capability of running SSH. Maybe it has an SSH service. Maybe it has a SQL service here with the MySQL, OpenVPN. So it's a little bit of information gathering. If we were to land on a machine, for example, and we're a low-level user with no privileges, we could start to look at who are the other users on the computer. Why are they important? How can we get a hold of them? Where are their files located? What kind of services are running on this machine? This is all part of the information gathering stage of ethical hacking, and this file leads to a lot of clues for us. Now, clearing the screen, let's say I want to view the shadow file. The shadow file is the file that contains the password hashes for this machine. I'm going to go ahead and try to type in cat Etsy shadow. Permission denied. Okay, maybe I need to use sudo. Let's try it here, enter our password. Oh, John is not in the sudoers file. This is also called the sudoers file, and you can also call sudo sudo. Depends on your nomenclature and how you pronounce it. I'm a sudo person. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and Control L. We're going to switch user back into Kali, and we're going to take a look at some stuff. So if I go switch user, Kali, it's going to ask me for the password. We're going to enter our password in. And first thing, I want to show you the shadow file before we move on to the sudoers file. So if we go sudo cat Etsy shadow, I think this is important to see. You can come in here and remember how I said with a hash that this is set here. So our root password has not been set. There's no hash in here. And this is security best practice. We don't really want to have a root password unless we absolutely need to. In this instance, we might just want to have certain users that can elevate into root. And then if logging is enabled, we can then see from our logs who accessed that root account at what time. You really don't want to have a root password where anybody can just log in with a known password, because then that eliminates some accountability. So best practice would say, hey, if we have a Linux machine, you get all regular user accounts. And then if you want to run something as an elevated privilege, you're going to do that with your account and then use sudo for that. But looking down here, we can see the hashes for this computer. Okay. And what's interesting actually is Callie and John have the same password, but they have different hashes. And that is sort of unique. If you saw this in a Windows machine, if the password was the same on the local machine, you would see the exact same hash, and that is a clear indicator that password reuse is in play, but here it's not. So the hashing algorithm that's being used is a little bit different, and it's generating different hashes even though the password is the same. Regardless, the password for both of these accounts is password, and that's very weak and can easily be cracked, as we'll find out later on. Okay, now onto the sudoers file. What we're going to do is we're going to do a sudo cat, and we're going to look at Etsy sudoers, just like that. And I might have typed that a little fast, so I'm going to go ahead and scroll back up for a second. Sudo cat Etsy sudoers. Okay, just like that. It should auto tab complete. And from there, we're going to come in here and we're going to look at who has what privileges. Well, if you see allow members of a group sudo to execute any command, and you see %sudo, so it's calling sudo from somewhere else. Sometimes we can just include users in here. We could say, hey, the user Callie, I want to do these things. Instead, this is saying, hey, anybody a part of this group, I want to be able to do whatever they want. They can execute any commands like they were the root user, essentially. So with that, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at who is in that %sudo group. And we can do that by using the grep command. So we can say grep, and we're going to get really familiar with grep in the bash scripting video, but basically think of grep as pulling out a specific string or element out of a file or some contents that you want to see. It's a great way to narrow down specifics and pull down only the information that you want, and we're going to get really familiar with it here in a couple of videos. So we're going to say grep, and then we're going to say sudo, just like this. And we're going to do that from Etsy group. Okay, and it says who has the sudo privilege. Here, all we see is Callie. So our user has sudo privilege. If we wanted to give privileges to John, we'd have to add John to the sudo group in the Etsy group. Or we could add John specifically to the sudoers file and give him specific permissions as well. And as we move on in the course and we get into privilege escalation, and if you ever go into more of the privilege escalation courses that we have, you'll see that we look at sudo privileges immediately when we get onto a machine by doing something like sudo-l, and we'll take a look at those and say, okay, what commands can I run? And in this instance, we could see, okay, all commands can be run here. But sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes we can only run one specific command, or maybe John, for example, we want John to be able to run Python because John's a developer. So John can run Python with sudo privileges, but cannot run anything else. So something to think about. Depending on the individual and who we want to give permissions to on that machine, they might not have privileges to access everything as sudo. They can actually be limited in what they can run as well. So that is it for this video. I'm going to go ahead and catch you in the next one. Now we're going to touch on networking commands that are relevant to penetration testing and relevant to this course. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to use the IP command, and that is IPA. IPA lists all is the way I like to think about it. And you can see here that we have a loopback address and we have our ETH0. This is our Ethernet address. And you can see that we have an IP address here, IPv4, of 192.168.138.140. We are on a /24 subnet. And here is our broadcast address here. We can also see our IPv6 here, which is nice. And we can see our MAC address here. So we can also look at this through the ifconfig command. And that will show us the same things. Here's Ethernet 0. Here is the loopback. All the same information here. ifconfig is the old school way of doing it. IPA is the newer way of doing it. IPA is nice and colorful. If I'm being honest, I still use ifconfig because I like the old school way of doing things. But IPA is the new way of doing things. And in some instances, ifconfig requires sudo to even run or may no longer be on a machine. But in some instances, IP is not on a machine. Depending on what type of machine you're on and what you access, you may need either one of these, so it's great to show you both. Now, while the IPA does all, IF only shows the Ethernet connection, so the hardwired connections. If we want to see wireless connections, we need to do IWconfig. And in this instance, you're going to see down here that we have no wireless connections right now. When we get into wireless hacking, we'll see that we have connections established and we'll use the IWconfig command. But just know for now that it's for wireless, and if you ever need to use it, that's what it's for. Let's clear our screen, and the next thing I want to cover is the IPN, and N stands for neighbor. The alternative to this is the ARP-A. Okay, what is ARP? If you do not know what ARP is, that is the Address Resolution Protocol. This comes from your networking. If you are not familiar with networking, then you may need to go study up on a little bit of this. Now, ARP says what IP address is associated with what MAC address. And what happens is a broadcast message goes out when we are trying to identify an IP address and a MAC address. So broadcast goes out and it says, who has this IP address? And whoever has the IP address will come back and it'll say, hey, that's me. I have that IP address and here is my MAC address. So now you can associate my MAC address with this IP address. And it is a way to identify these two items together and link them up. So again, in this instance, we can use the IP command or the old ARP command. Now the IP command is a little bit prettier and a little bit more colorful, and I think easier to read in my opinion, but either will work in this situation. Another IP command that we're going to want to run and know is the IPR command. Now R stands for route. You could also type in route and you'll get similar feedback here. So what we're looking at is what is called a routing table. We want to know where our traffic is routing. And here you can see on either one of these that we're routing through 192.168.138.0. We have an open gateway. We can see the gateway here is 138.2. We can see our mask here. And we can find all that information out up here as well. So it's important to know the routing and what's going on, especially if you are in a network, for example, where you might have multiple routes. Say if we come in and we say, oh, IPA, okay, we're on the 192.168.138 network, but we just try to connect to only the machines on this network. We see a /24, we think, okay, well, I know a /24 has 255 potential IP addresses, and I'm going to go ahead and just stick to scanning that subnet and looking for those IPs on that subnet. Well, if you looked at the routing table, you might actually see that there's a 137 in here, or 136, or maybe a 10 IP address, or something different than what you have here. Maybe you have the ability to talk to other networks, even though you're on this 1/24 network. Very important to look at the routing table. It's also important because in real life pen tests, we have been on a quote unquote segmented network. And in reality, it really wasn't a segmented network. There just wasn't a route to that network. So they said that we were isolated and we couldn't access anything. And all we had to do was say, okay, we're going to go add that network to our routing table. And what do you know? We were able to scan and connect to the network. So being able to know your routing table, being able to understand what a route is and how to add routes, how to remove routes can become important as well. These are things that you should already know from general networking. I'm showing you the commands here for basic routing and how to display the routing tables. If you need further information on routing tables, you should go look that up and research that before continuing on with the ethical hacking course. Okay, last command I want to get through. That is the ping command. So I'm going to do an ifconfig again. And in this instance, I'm just going to ping 192.168.138. And I believe earlier I saw a .2 was my gateway. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit enter. That should talk back to me, and it does. Now, if you are a Windows user and you've ever used ping before, it will only send 4 packets out. So it'll check 4 times. As you can see here, we are getting more than 4 packets sent. We are sending indefinitely. And I'm going to go ahead and just hit Control-C and stop that. We are definitely seeing that we're getting responses back. Now, there is a way to limit the amount that we send and the amount of traffic that we're sending. But basically what we're doing with the ping command is we're saying, hey, are you there? Are you alive? Can you respond to me and let me know you're there? So I asked the machine at this IP address to respond and tell me, yes, I am here. Now, this is called ICMP traffic. Not all machines permit ICMP traffic. Just because we ping a machine and it does not respond does not mean that it's not online. Okay? There are machines that have ICMP disabled and will not respond to ping requests. But ping is a quick way to see if a machine is online, and typically by default, ping or ICMP is enabled on most machines. Just as a further example, we can ping a machine that we do not believe to be alive. So I'm going to change this to a 3. I don't think there's a 3 on my network. And you're going to see it's going to try to send data, and it's just going to get stuck here and say, host unreachable. Now again, that could potentially mean that that host is not there, or it could potentially mean that the host has ICMP disabled. But we're going to be using ping sweeping to identify a host in our network. And we'll do that here in just a couple of videos. But I wanted you to get familiar with the ping command if you weren't familiar already. Now, there are some commands in this video that we did not talk about. For example, the netstat command. Now, the netstat command is used to identify what open ports and services are there. We'll take a look at that more later on. But just know that that command exists and that we're going to do due diligence on that command later. So any of you that are watching that have a networking background or are like, hey, you didn't show netstat, that's so important. You're correct. It's coming later on in the course. So that's it for this video. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next one. Let's now talk about viewing, creating, and editing files. And we've done a little bit of this in the course already. You've seen me do something like echo hello, and remember that prints out to the screen. And we could just echo that again, like a hello, and put that into a file. And you've seen me do that. We'll just call this one hey.txt. And if we ls, we should see hey.txt right here. If we do a cat hey.txt, we should print out to the screen, hello. All these should be pretty familiar to you. So let's build upon this. Let's talk about how we can append to this and overwrite these files in different ways that we can actually create and edit files. So I'm going to clear the screen here. Now, what if I wanted to add to this file, and I'm just tabbing up, by the way. What if I want to say hello again? So I want to say echo hello again into this hey.txt file that already exists. What do we think is going to happen here? So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and then I'm going to cat out the hey.txt. Well, now it says hello again. It used to say hello. Well, that is because when we use one greater than symbol like this, what's going to happen is that overwrites the file. So if we tab up, and if we go over and we just write hey again, just for fun, and let's add a second one of these. So now there should be two of these greater than symbols. We hit enter, we cat out hey.txt, and now you can see it says hello again and hello again. Why do we care? Why are we doing this? Well, when we are using scripting, for example, and we want to loop through a bunch of information and we want to add that information to a file, we might use something like this where if we're gathering, say, IP addresses, this is foreshadowing, by the way, say we're gathering IP addresses and we are wanting to put them all in a file, we're going to need to use something like a double greater than in order to not overwrite the file with one IP address. We want to list all the IP addresses in the file. So you're going to see that when we get into the bash scripting of this section. Let's clear our screen. Another way that we can make a new file is just to say touch new file.txt. And if we ls, you can see that new file.txt is here. We can cat out new file.txt, and nothing is going to be in there because we didn't tell it to do anything. We just said touch, which creates a file. So we can use a different type of editor to try and edit this and save the file. Now, there are a few editors that we can use within our terminal. So we can use something called Nano, which is my personal favorite. You may hear other people talk about Vi and Vim. You may hear lots of jokes about quitting Vim and how it's impossible to quit Vim. And for that reason, honestly, because of the complications and because I like simplicity, I just use Nano. So we can Nano new file. And in here, you can type whatever you want. I'm going to literally say, I can type whatever I want in here. And now I'm going to hit Control X. And throughout this course, you're going to actually see me use Nano quite a bit. And we're going to use it for updating files and shellcode. And it's beneficial if we log into a machine remotely, for example, and we won't have the ability to have a graphical user interface type notepad, which I'm going to show you here in a second. We might not have the luxury of having something like that. We might have to use Nano or Vim or an in-terminal text editor. So we're going to go ahead and hit Control X here. I'm going to hit Y, which is going to say, yes, I want to save this file. And then I'm going to hit enter. And now if I cat out new file.txt, you can see it says I can type whatever I want in here. Lastly, we're going to look at a graphical notepad. So we're going to use mousepad. We can type in mousepad. And we can just say new file.txt, just like we created. And in here, you can see that it says I can type whatever I want in here, and that's true. I can also modify. It's just like a notepad if you had on Windows machine or if you've used LeafPad or any sort of notepad type material. This one's just called mousepad. So we can Control S and save and then just exit out. If we cat out our new file again, you can see I can also modify. Now, throughout this course, you might see me use a tool called gedit. It is not installed on this machine yet. Though we are making updates to the course, we will be using gedit. Anytime you see me use gedit, feel free to use mousepad instead of gedit. It's become deprecated. Offensive security got rid of it in Kali Linux, and now if you go hit gedit, It'll say it's not found, but you can install it. We're not going to do that right now. But when we install tools in a upcoming video, you will be able to install that with one of the tools that we're running. So anyway, just note that we're going to be using mousepad instead of gedit because it's the new and latest and greatest. One last thing, with Nano or any of these tools, you can make a brand new file. So you can say like brand new file.txt, and then you can type whatever in here and Control X, hit Y, hit enter, and then you can cat out brand new file, and guess what? It's there. So the file doesn't have to be existing to use Nano or existing to use mousepad. You can create new files with these commands as well. So that is it for this video. I'm going to go ahead and catch you in the next one. Another topic we need to talk about is starting and stopping services. We may have a service like a web server or SSH or maybe SQL or some sort of database that we need to start while we're already running Kali, or we might want to start a service on boot every single time that our computer loads. If you've ever used Windows, this is similar to installing a program and then having that boot up on launch. It's kind of the same thing here. If we're installing something, we want that service to start on launch, we have to tell our machine to do that. So we're going to look at how to start a service and how to have a service start on launch. So the first service that we're going to look at is the Apache service. And this is what I used to use when I first started out as an ethical hacker. And the reason is that we can spin up our own web server fairly easily and host malicious data or files or things that we might want to access or might want somebody else to access. So before we run that command, I do want to do a proof of concept. So let's do an ifconfig, and we're going to grab our IP address here. I'm going to copy this, and then I want to open up Firefox. From within Firefox, I'm going to go ahead and try to navigate to that IP address. And you're going to see that it says it's unable to connect. This is exactly what we expected. So now what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to say sudo service Apache 2 start. We hit enter. It's going to ask for our sudo password. And then we have no confirmation of anything. So let's go ahead and come in back into the browser. And we're going to refresh, and let's take away the HTTPS, and now you can see that this is here on port 80. So we are actually on HTTP, not HTTPS, and we have an Apache server running now. Now let's say we wanted to stop this service. We can go in here and say sudo service Apache to stop. And before we do that, I want to show you something. So if we come back into the Apache 2, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. You can see that our files are located in the var www HTML folder. And what that is, if we come to our home folder here, and we just go to File System, we scroll down and go to var, and then we go to www HTML. All I'm doing is going to the same location here. Why I'm doing this is where if I wanted to host like a picture or a file or malware, I could put that in here. This index.html is the same index page that's loaded here. Like if I open that, that's literally the same page that's being hosted. You're seeing it here from a file format, but now if I go back, you can see I'm hosting it at this IP address. So if I wanted to host something malicious, I could do that. Now, in order to stop the service, all we have to do is say stop, hit enter, then we come back and we refresh this page. You can see that we're now again unable to connect. Now, I did mention in the beginning of this video that this was my favorite way to host malicious stuff or just host files for whatever purpose. Now that has changed. I now use Python to do this. So we can create a file. Let's go ahead and just say echo hello, and we're going to do hello.txt. So if we ls, we can see that we've got a bunch of stuff in here, hello.txt being one of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spin up a web server on the fly with Python. So I'm going to say Python 3 -m http.server, and then I'm going to give it port 80. Now, what we're saying is we want to run the module HTTP server, and we're going to run port 80 here. You can put whatever port you want. And you can see now it says, hey, it's hosting up HTTP on port 80. And what's going to happen is any file within the directory that I'm in is going to now be hosted. So you can see that I'm hosting all this stuff here. Pretty awesome. It's a quick way to host up a web server without having to start and stop services. And you can, on the fly from within a folder, just start a web server. So I think this is the cooler and better way to do it. So I wanted to show you how to start a service, but also that Python has some robust capabilities as well. If you follow into the Python section, we'll cover how to run an FTP server as well, which is also fun stuff. So I'm going to hit Control-C, which is going to, again, shut down this server. If I come here and refresh, you'll see that it's now shut down. And we can go ahead and talk about one more thing before we go. So let's say that we wanted a service to start when we started our machine. Well, for that, we're going to use the systemctl command, systemctl, and we can say enable. If we wanted to, for example, enable SSH, we can come in here and just enable SSH, and we just hit enter on this. And now you can see that it's enabled. So when we restart the computer, SSH will always be enabled for us. Now I'm going to disable that. This isn't like security best practice. And now you can see that we have disabled it and we're good to go. So if you ever have a service that you want to run, you just need to figure out the name of the service and enable that. And there may be times that you want things to run. Like historically, I have ran SSH with it enabled, or I used to run the Apache 2 server, so I didn't have to spin it up every time. I just had a place to go immediately host that. But your mileage may vary depending on what it is you want to run, but knowing these commands is important in case you need to start or stop a service, maybe restart a service. Same thing with enabling a service at boot up or disabling a service at boot up. So that's it for this video. I'll go ahead and see you over in the next one. Now let's talk about installing and updating tools. So the first thing that we're going to do from our command line is we're going to look at how we would update our current machine. So just like other operating systems, Linux machines require updates as well, and patching can be best practice. So in order to update and upgrade our machine, we're going to use the sudo command, and we're going to say apt, apt, and then we're going to say update and upgrade, just like that. So make sure you use two ampersand symbols here. We're going to do two commands. We're going to say, first, I want you to update. Second, I want you to upgrade. Well, why are we doing this? Why are we running two commands in the first place? Well, what we do when we actually install items on our Kali machine, we are going out to what are called repositories, and we're looking through packages. And the update command is going out to the known repositories, and it is updating those repositories. And then it's going to look at those repositories and say, okay, what needs upgraded here? So what tools have upgrades or updates available for them that we need? So if we run this command, you're going to see that it's going to go through these repositories. You can see it going through these Kali rolling and release, AMD 64 packages and contents, etc., etc. It'll take some time. As it goes through and it updates these repositories, it's going to find what programs we need, and it'll provide it in a list. Now, what you can see is it's asking us, are you root? So this is a lesson here. Sometimes we have to be the root user. We can't be just a sudo user to run the command. So what we're going to do in this instance is we're going to sudo switch user into root. Now we're root, and we're going to run that command again. We're going to say apt update and apt upgrade. Okay, and it's going to run through this, and then it should provide us with a list of what we're going to install, which if we scroll back up to the top, you can see that it says, hey, these packages were automatically installed and no longer required. And it says we can use the apt auto remove command to do that. It's saying here are the brand new packages that need to be installed. And then here are the packages that are going to be upgraded. So these are already installed, such as like Apache 2 has some updates that are required, and it's going to go through and install all of these. Now, when you scroll down to the bottom, it's going to say you need 801 megabytes, and yours might be different depending on when you watch this video. It's going to say, do you want to continue this operation? In this instance, I'm going to say no. And the reason that I'm going to say no is because updating on Kali Linux can break things. You should always have almost 2 copies of your Linux, right? You should take a backup copy before you ever make an update. And there are some limitations on being able to make backups, depending on if you're using VMware or VirtualBox, and we're not going to get into that right now. But just know that tools can easily get broken by pushing updates. And we'll talk about a tool that you can use that is up to date and kind of makes your Kali the latest and greatest without breaking anything. Even the current version of Kali right now, 2022.2, not all the tools work out of the box as the way that they should. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. So let's say that you wanted to install a tool, and we're just going to go grab one as an example. So let's say that there was a tool you wanted to install, like this cron daemon common. I'm just going to copy that. You could come in here and you could say apt install cron daemon common like this. Hit enter, and it's going to say, oh, you want to install this? Just hit yes, and it will install. And it will also upgrade this cron package here. I'm not going to do that, but just know that you can also install applications as a one-time thing if they're a part of the repository that you have. We're not going to get into updating repositories and adding manual repositories. We don't need to know that at this point in our Linux careers. We just need to understand that we're going out to a repository and we can download those items or packages based on what is in the repository. So updating the repository is always good, and then we check for upgrades available to our packages. In this instance, we're not going to do any updating or upgrading, but there may be a time where we need to install a specific tool, or we go out to the web and we have to grab a tool and it says, hey, run this apt install command. This is what it's going to be doing. This is how we would install something if we need to. Now, the next thing that we're going to look at is we're going to look at the git command. And Git is a tool that runs with GitHub. I'm going to open up a new Firefox, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. We're going to go to GitHub. Actually, let's just go to Google. We're going to go to Google. And a lot of times in our ethical hacking careers, we're going to be searching for tools. We're going to come out here and we're going to say, oh, I really want to find a tool maybe that does brute force Office 365. And then I might say something like GitHub, and you can see it's already starting to fill out. And we might go find something like, okay, there's this daft hack tool. We might click on that. And we come in here and it might tell you how to install this. Well, this is PowerShell, so that's not a great example. We might come into here and we might say, okay, here's one how to install. So you go through and it'll say, here's the usage on how to use this. And sometimes they'll give you installation instructions, but a lot of times all you will need to do is you'll need to come in here and just download the code to install the file. So I'm going to show you a tool that we're going to install and run. We go to Google and we search for pimp my Kali, just like that. You're going to see that we can click in here and this tool is available to us to download. Now, one way to look at a tool and see if it has any relevancy on GitHub is to look up at the number of stars that it has and the forks that it has. Anything with like 700 stars like this is pretty reputable, and you also should look at when it was last updated. You can see that this was last updated last month. Now, full disclosure, DeWalt actually works for TCM Security and is a fantastic person. If you never got to interact with DeWalt, he is somebody that is awesome and a great resource. He built this out because there were so many issues with Kali Linux, and the tools that were coming freshly installed, like in 2022.2, don't always work in the way that we intend them to work. So a lot of tools are broken, some things need downgraded, and there's a lot of options in here that can tell you, hey, here's what we can fix. Like we can fix different missing issues that are going on, or we can fix Golang or fix Impacket. And you don't have to worry about what any of that means right now until we get into pen testing. But this is something that we actually do install and run when we build out our lab machines, or we build out our machines for even hacking on clients. This is such a well done tool. And he tells you in here how to install it. He says, hey, get clone right here off of this address. We can also come up here and we can go to the code and we can just copy. We say copy pimp my Kali right here. And then we'll come in and we can just say get clone. Actually, let's switch user. I'm sorry, let's switch user back to Kali. And we'll enter here. And then what I like to do when I install tools is I like to install them into the op folder, the OPT folder. So from here, we're going to run get clone, paste that. Actually, we're going to run sudo get clone. I apologize. And then enter your password. And now, if we look in here, we should have pimp my Kali, which we do. So if we cd to pimp my Kali, and now we ls, we can see that we have the pimpmykali.sh script. If you come back into the website, it will tell you how to run and operate this. Any decent GitHub will say, hey, here's how you run this script. So it says, hey, you just run sudo pimp my Kali. This is for a new Kali VM. You just need to run menu option N. We're going to copy this and paste it. And then we're going to run it. So now this tells you, what do you want to do? Well, here's all the different options. N is a new VM setup. Run this option as your first time running pimp my Kali. Okay, so that's going to fix all the things for you. I'm going to go ahead and hit N and let this run. It's going to go out and fetch some stuff from repositories, and it's running apt update. And now it's going to install certain tools and packages and uninstall certain tools and packages. As you can see, it's rolling through here. So go ahead and let this run. I'm going to pause the video here for a second and then meet me back when you're at the next screen where you can actually enter in any sort of command. Okay, so it's been about 5 minutes and we get to this page here. And you can see that it's asking us if we want to run root login installation. It explains that in Kali 2019.x, the default user used to be root, which we talked about early on in this course. And now that they've switched it to Kali, which is what we've been using. Now, do we want to re-enable the ability to log in as root in Kali? In this instance, I'm going to choose yes. However, you need to make sure that you are comfortable and capable of running as root in Linux. If you do not feel comfortable, stick with running as Kali. You're going to see me throughout the course as we get into the ethical hacking section running as root. Just know that there may be times where you might need to use sudo, or you may need to switch user into root, as you saw me do with upgrading packages just a few minutes ago, that may be required. So if you're understanding of that, you can hit no on this screen, and that's perfectly okay. Security best practice suggests to hit no. I'm going to hit yes because I feel comfortable running as root. I'm the only user on this machine, and I don't have any accountability or repudiation to worry about. So I'm going to give a new password for this. And I'm going to enter it again. And now it's going to ask if we want to copy everything over from our Kali folder into our root folder. I'm going to say no. And now it's going to continue on installing. So we're going to let this run again. Go ahead and pause the video if you need to, and then we'll meet you back when this is all said and done. Okay, and when everything is said and done, which it took about 10 minutes to get through all of that, you should get to this all done, happy hacking screen right here, and everything should be installed for you. If you chose to go the root route, that's a weird thing to say. If you chose to go the root route, you can log out and log back in as root and begin using Linux as root. Otherwise, you can continue on with this lesson using Kali as your main user. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the next video. Last video in the section, and this is going to be one of my favorites. So what we're going to be talking about is scripting with Bash. I'm going to show you some cool tricks that we can do to kind of narrow down some of the results that we get, and then I'm going to show you how you can automate some of that process, and we'll take that and even write out some for loops and one-line loops, which this might not make any sense right now, and that's absolutely okay, but by the time the video is done, hopefully it does. So the first thing I want to show you is I want to show you how we're going to write a ping sweep. So we're going to write a ping sweeper. Basically, we're going to go out and say, I want to ping a device. If that device is alive, go ahead and show me that result. And we're going to sweep an entire network. So what we're going to do first is we're going to identify a device that's alive so we can test this out and then build upon that. So you can go ahead and type in ifconfig and then just hit enter. Now my Ethernet here is on a NATed network. So I'm running through a different IP address subnet here. So this one is 192.168.57.150. My actual IP address is on a .4.x here. So I'm going to, for this example, I'm going to be pinging 192.168.4.29. However, and you can see here's the ping that we're getting back. However, if you are unsure of a IP address in your house that is active or your subnet in your house, that's okay. You can just run 57.1 for this example. You might not get a lot of returned results. However, you might only get 1 or 2 when we do this sweep. So I advise you to figure out what your IP address is. That's a good challenge anyway. And if you are familiar with networking, which you should be at this point, then you should be able to determine the IP address of your home network. But if you do not do that, then you can use 57.1 or whatever your IP address is here on this third octet. So that will also work if you see that. All right, so I'm going to clear this. Now, what are we noticing when we're pinging? We're pinging this address and we're getting some data back. Now, if we ping an active address, you can see that we get, okay, 64 bytes from 192.168.4.29. It's saying it's active. We're getting details back. If we were to ping something, let me do like 41, where we just don't get any data back. Okay, and let's try this one more time. Let's try this a different way. Let's do like a count of 1. -C of 1, we'll do a count of 1. It's going to try to send one packet over and see if it works. Nothing's happening, right? It's trying to transmit that packet. You could see that it's getting 0 received here, where here's getting 4 received. No data is coming back. It's just not doing anything for us. So the thing that we can identify here is what's the big difference? If we look at line 1 and 2 versus line 1 and 2, what are we seeing when we get data back? Well, the big difference here is well, 2 of them, I guess. We see that we get this response, right? That's big difference. And then down here, it'll say, hey, we received some packets if it's not 0. Now, the easy way to do this is to look at a line that says, hey, we received data, which is this line here, okay? Now, what I want to do is I want to narrow this down just a little bit. What we're going to say is we're just going to do a ping of 1 time. So I'm going to clear this. I'm going to bring it back to this like this. I'm going to do a count of 1. And that should just ping once, and that's perfect. We don't need to ping endlessly. We just want to make sure we can ping once, and then we're done. Okay, and then from here, I'm going to put this into a text file. I'm just going to call this ip.txt, just like that. So when I cat out ip.txt, now you can see that I have this file. It's stored. I don't have to run the command again. We're good to go. So what we're going to do now is we can take this, and then we can start gathering data based off of what we see here. So what I want to do is I want to just extract this one line here, the 64 bytes from 192.168.4.29. And the best way to do that is with a command called grep. So grep is going to look for a specific term or phrase, and we can do that, and it's going to pull down any line that has that term or phrase. So if I say grep here, and then I just put in quotation 64 bytes, like this, now, when I cat out this, all I'm pulling down is this line, and it's even highlighting it for us. It's saying, here's the line that we see, 64 bytes from 192.168. Okay, so we've extracted just the one line. And why am I extracting this line? Well, if we're building out a ping sweeper, what I want to do is I want to sweep every single IP within a specific subnet. So say this .4, right? I want to ping 4.1.2.3 all the way through 254, 255. I want to see if I can get through all the IP addresses in a subnet. So what we're going to do is we're going to ping every single one of them and say, hey, are you up? Are you there? And we're going to do it with a count of 1. And we're going to say, are you there? Okay. And if they're there, they're going to say, yeah, I'm here. 64 bytes. Here's my response. And it's going to say 64 bytes from this IP address. So we want to extract the IP addresses to say, yeah, we're alive. That's basically our goal here. So when we run this on a bigger scale, which is what we're going to do, we're going to need to grep out this information and extract this information to where we only just get the IP address back. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to start narrowing down and grabbing this IP address, and then I'm going to show you how we're going to take this all in one instance and run it and then extract IP addresses. So from here, what I want to do is I want to do another command. So every time we pipe, we're saying, hey, run this command, then with that command, run this command, then also run this command too. So we're going to keep running this command on top of this to narrow things down. So here's what we're doing here. We're going to run a command called cut. And with cut, we're going to say, I want to cut something out of this. We need to provide it what is called a delimiter. So we do a -D like this. And the delimiter I'm going to use is a space. And then I'm going to say -F for field, and then I'm going to say 4. Okay, what is this doing? Well, it's saying, hey, I want to cut this line that you're getting back on a space. So the delimiter is a space. So here's a space, here's a space, here's a space. And it says, I want to count up to 4 to grab that data. So 1, 2, 3, 4 right here. So if we say 4 here, like this, we hit enter, we're grabbing that specific IP address because we're doing it by spaces. If we did it on 3, what do you think we're going to grab? We're going to grab the word from. So you can see here's from. So what I want to do is grab the IP. So we're going to use this cut just like this, use our delimiter, and then get to the correct field position that we want to grab the IP address. All right, so we've got the IP address. Now there's only one thing wrong here with this IP address, is that there is a little colon on the end of it. We just want this without a colon at all. We want it just like this. Now there's a couple ways we can do this. We could use something called sed. Sed's a little bit complicated and a little bit advanced, I would say, for where we're at right now. So I'd rather teach you an easier way to do this. And that is called translate. So with translate, all we're going to do is we're going to do one more pipe like this. And we're just going to say TR for translate. A -D for a delimiter again. And then we're going to say we want to get rid of this. And that's it. We're just getting rid of this. Okay, so if we run this one more time, now you can see that we've successfully extracted this IP address out. That's our goal. That's all we wanted to do. Now, how can we apply this to something bigger? How can we make this part of a bigger script? That is the question. And we're going to do that. So what I want you to do is I just want you to copy this, okay? Copy this entire line. And we're going to go into a mouse pad. So let's copy this selection. And I'm going to clear my screen. I'm just going to say mouse pad. And we're going to call this ipsweep.sh. Okay, so this is going to be a bash script. And I'm going to make this bigger. And the first thing we're going to do with our bash script is we have to declare that it's a bash script. We're going to say #bang right here, or shebang is what we'd call this, /bin/bash. This allows the machine to know when we run this, this allows bash to know, hey, we're calling this, here's the location of bash, this is what we're running with the script. You're also going to see this when we use Python as well. You'll see the declaration here at the top, or when we're calling this out. So I'm going to go ahead and Control S and save this. That'll add some nice color to this, so when we're coding this out, we get to see in color. I like that a lot. I'm going to actually make this a little bit smaller and then make this like this here so we can get the whole picture. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to paste in what we just wrote. So I'm just going to Control V here and paste that in. So we don't need to do a cat of an IP address here. In this instance, instead, we're going to change this back. We're going to ping. Remember, we want to ping every device in the network. So we want to ping, say if we're pinging 192.168.4.x, okay, we want to ping that. And we can leave this like this for now. Don't worry about changing anything here. This is just going to be a placeholder. We're going to do a little bit of extra syntax here to make this work. So we're going to write what is called a for loop. So we're going to say for, and I'll explain what this does here in a second. You're also going to see this again when we get into Python and coding. And so you'll be able to understand more and more about loops and what for loops are, while loops, etc. They're very, very useful and very common in coding and scripting. So I'm going to say for IP in, and then I'm going to say sequence 1 through 254. Now, very important, this character here is not an apostrophe. Okay, this is not an apostrophe.
This is the little line, I don't know what it's called. It's above the tilde next to your escape button on your keyboard. So it's this right here, okay? It's like a backwards apostrophe almost. I'm sure there's a term for it, I just don't know it. So you come in here and you say, okay, for IP address in sequence 1 through 254, and I'm gonna explain what all this does in a second. I want you just to type this out for now. I want you to say do, all right? And then I want you to come down here and we're going to say ampersand on this line and we're gonna say done. I'm gonna explain what all this means. Okay, so this is a loop that we've just created. What we're saying is for the IP address, and we're just declaring this could be Bob if you wanted to. I'm just making it a name or a term that's easy for us to remember. So we're gonna say for IP, but if you wanna call this Bob, call it Bob. For IP in sequence 1 through 254. So what sequence is doing is it's saying, hey, I wanna count everything from 1 to 254. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way to 254. This for loop means I'm gonna do this every single time. So for IP in 1, for IP in 2, for IP in 3, we're gonna run this command until we're done. So until this sequence has run 255 times, it's done. Okay, and now we're gonna say, I wanna do a count of $IP. So what we're saying here is for IP in sequence 1 through 254, go ahead and do a ping -C for a count of 1, 192.168.4.254. And here we're gonna say .1, .2, .3. Every time this loops over and over and over, it's going to be incrementing that number through this sequence. That's all we're doing. This is a basic loop, okay? So we're gonna keep going through and through and through. Now, this will work. If you plugged in your hard-coded IP address here, this will absolutely work. Now, we can improve this just a little bit if we want to. So what's going on here is what we're gonna say is if we wanted to run this, we would just do // and then IP sweep, okay? And this would work, that's fine. But we can make this a little bit better from a coding perspective. We can come in here and we can give this a $1, and that means argument 1. So what we're saying here is I wanna give an argument instead. So if you wanna be technical, this first /IP sweep.sh, that is argument 0. So you can consider this $0. Argument 1 would be what you type after that. So this would be argument 1, argument 2, etc. So in this case, what we could do is we could say, I wanna run 192.168.4 like this, and this will run the .1, .2, .3 after it. So you provide the argument, it places that here in argument 1, and then it does the rest for you. So this way you can specify your network, and if you wanted to ping multiple networks, you don't have to come back in here and keep changing this. It just works. So super easy. This is a great little script for a /24 type subnet, okay? Okay, so let's go ahead and try running this really quick. I'm gonna just Control S, save this. I'm gonna close it. We're gonna do a chmod +X on IP sweep. If it'll allow us to, we might have to do a, okay, let's do LSLA real quick, make sure it worked. It sure did. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. We're going to run the IP sweep, and we're going to say 192.168. You just put in your IP here, and I'm gonna run that, all right? And you could see all the devices that are coming back within my network here. I'm gonna go ahead and hit Control C, cancel this out. And so this is grabbing all the different devices in my network. Now that's great. That works out really well. But what we can do is improve this. What if I typed in a, what if I didn't type anything at all? What if I just hit enter here? Now I'm just getting all kinds of pings unknown, and it's going off of some of the stuff I was doing before, but it just causes all kinds of issues and errors, right? So you can see I'm trying to hit Control C, it's taking its time to break. Here we get issues because we're just allowing any sort of argument here. What we need to do is we need to fix this up just a little bit. So what we can say is we can come back in here and just go mousepad ipsweep.sh and come in here and let's add a little bit extra. Oh, and I also left this in here. Don't leave this in here. That's why that was running twice. Okay, so what we're doing here is we need to add in a statement. What we're gonna do is we're going to add in a if statement. If statements are conditions. we're saying, hey, if this condition is met, do something for us. If it's not met, then go ahead and do something else. All right. So we're going to say if, and we're going to just put in here $1 is equal to nothing, then we're going to go ahead and just say then echo you forgot an IP address. Echo syntax, something like this. We'll just say IP sweep.sh, and we'll go 192.168.4 like that. Okay. And then if we did do this correctly, if we do have an argument inside of argument 1, then we're going to say else, do all of this here, and be done. And then we're going to end our if statement with fi. Now, this script, or this resemblance of this script, is not one of my own, by the way. This goes credit to something I've modified over time, but the original credit definitely goes to Georgia Weidman. I remember seeing this in her course a long, long time ago when I was first getting started, and she did a great job of teaching this. This is just a modification of this script, so I just want to make sure that all credit goes to her. But looking at this, let's break this down really quick before we run this again. We've got an if statement. We said if argument 1 doesn't equal anything, then you're going to echo back out and say, hey, you forgot an IP address. Here's the syntax. If it does include something, then we're going to go ahead and come in here and say, let's run our for statement, our for loop, and run through it, and then we're going to end our if here. The only thing that I'm doing uniquely here is I'm including this ampersand, which is going to run this command multiple times at once is a good way to explain it. Basically, we have a couple ways of doing this. We could say like this, we could put a command here, and this will run one at a time. It'll say, okay, for 1, for 2, for 3. This allows multiple instances of this loop to run at once and just speeds things up. I could show you the difference between that. So I'm going to go ahead and just Control S, save this. I'm going to go ahead and just run this script real quick. Now let's try running it without anything here. Okay, now look, it says you forgot an IP address. So look, we did that correctly. Now let's go ahead and add the 192.168.4, run it. And you can see, okay, it's sweeping, but it's taking its sweet time. Especially for the IP addresses that are gonna hang, like if I don't have a .2 or .3, it's gonna take a while. So I'm gonna Control C and get out of this if it'll let me. It looks like it's actually gonna hang. So what we can do is we can come back in. I'm gonna open a new tab real quick just while that's waiting. And I'm just gonna say mousepad, and we're just going to go back into ipsweep.sh. It's in this folder. There we go. Okay. So from here, I'm going to change this back to the ampersand, and I'm going to save it. I just want you to see the difference really quick and why I run it like this. So ipsweep.sh 192.168.4. You can see it's picking everything up really fast. All right. What I can do now is I can run this and then store this into like ips.txt, something like that. Just like found IP addresses. Okay, so now if I cat ips.txt, I have all the IP addresses I just found, and I found them that fast versus this, which may still be going, and it is, and I can't even kill it. I'm just gonna close this out. Okay, so this is the big difference there with that ampersand and the speed of what it is capable of doing. So with all that being said, we could take this and do one more thing. So I wanna show you how we can utilize a one-liner. These are called one-line statements in Bash, and we can do similar to what we just did and accomplish that in this command line. So now we have an IP address. We have a list of IP addresses. Let's say that we want to run nmap. Now we haven't gotten to nmap yet. You don't need to really know about it. Just know that it is a tool that allows us to go out and do port scanning. Okay, so typically we would just say something like nmap, and we might do something like dash T4 dash A dash P dash, like this. This is just saying, I want to run nmap scan, I want to look at everything, and I want to scan all ports. This is just an example. You can just run nmap IP address like this, and that would be fine too. Like we could just go 192.168.4.29, and we'll do a quick nmap scan. Okay, but what we can't do here is we can't just say, hey, I want to run Well, we could say I want to run nmap for everything in .0/24. The issue is it's going to take time looking and finding what IP addresses are valid here. If we have a list, we can automate this process quite a bit. We can just come in here and we can say something a little bit different. We can say, hey, for IP, we're using the same kind of syntax, in $, and we're going to put parentheses here. We're going to say cat, and then we're going to say ips.txt, and then we're just going to do this. We're going to say do nmap $IP, and then again we have the option of doing done, or we can do ampersand done, just like this. Okay, I'm just going to do done here as an example and just show you. So this is really easy. We're saying, hey, for every IP address in this list, and all we're doing is we're catting out this IP list that we just had. So it's going to take the first IP, then run the nmap scan, and it's going to come back and run the next one. So until this list is completely done, it's going to keep going through this loop. That's all it is, a simple loop. And then we're going to say done. It's going to take that IP address, it's going to start scanning it, it's going to go through and hopefully find information and go in a loop. So this is a quick way to automate some of this process. I actually do this with a lot of my scripts where I will do some probing, see if anything is out there that's alive, put it into an IP file, and you're going to see this later in the course, and then nmap scan that. So think about this. Hopefully this gets your wheels spinning on what you can do to really start scripting some of this stuff out. And this is going to be the first time you get your hands dirty with scripting. We're going to go on again with this, and we're going to get more advanced as we go. But this should be a good introductory lesson to you on how we can build a simple tool and automate a lot of this process fairly easily with just a little bit of command line syntax. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the next section, and I will see you over there. Welcome to this module on Python. So if you've never used Python before or even heard of Python before, Python is a coding and scripting language. It is commonly used in ethical hacking, and it's commonly used all around the world. It is actually considered one of the best beginner languages to start with if you've never learned coding before. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to cover some of the basics of Python. So we'll cover everything you see on this screen here: strings, math, functions. We're going to get into conditional statements and looping. We'll get into some more advanced items, and eventually we're going to build our own tools. So we're going to be building a port scanner at the end of the lesson, and then when we get into the exploit development section of this course, we're going to use Python again to write our own exploits. So it's going to be used throughout the course. You're going to see it again as a ethical hacker as well. You're going to go onto websites and you might need to download Python code or something to utilize against a host or a client, and it's just going to be frequently seen for you. So very important topic to cover, especially for the foundations. One very big thing to point out: you do not have to be a developer to be successful in penetration testing. The important thing is that you understand what you're seeing and understand how to read code. If when you come away from this module, you have a better understanding on how to read what you are seeing in code, you'll be much better off. By no means do you have to be a developer. I am still to this day nowhere near a developer level, and I'm very, very successful in what I do. You don't have to be a developer. So the big takeaway here is to take very good notes, understand what you're seeing. If you need to watch a video multiple times in this section, absolutely okay. Just make sure you understand everything in front of you and understand that the lessons are going to build upon each other, and it should all come together in the end. And you're going to get to see it over and over through the course, especially in the exploit development section where we write our own Python script. So I look forward to teaching you this module on Python, and look forward to seeing you in the next video.